Hello, this is Gonzalo Lira speaking to you live, and this is the Roundtable, the Year in Review show. This is going to be an open house, and we're going to be going for as long as the caffeine and the nicotine last. So, and I've got a full stock, so I think it's going to be a long show. I'm joined by my co-host Brian Berletic of the New Atlas Channel. Brian, how's it going, man?
It's going well. Thank you for having me. I always enjoy these conversations, especially the open houses, because you never know who's going to pop in.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And we already have our first guest. We can say our first victim, poor guy. But anyway, I just want to say thanks to all who are coming to this show. We're going to be talking about anything and everything. And I swear to God, I have no idea how long this show is going to go because we have guests for at least the first 3 hours, possibly 4 hours. The last one went 4 hours, the last big one, remember?
Yeah, that was pretty long. That was a pretty long one.
Yeah, but people seem to enjoy it. I certainly did, and I hope you did too. And chat, do us a favor. I see Zariel. I see Reckless Abandon. Yeah, great to see you. Thank you so much for moderating. Chat, do us a favor and hit us with a +1 if everything is copacetic insofar as sound and video is concerned. Hey, Zariel, great to see you. I'll let the chat catch up. Yep, we're all copacetic. So we are going to talk. My preliminary thoughts about 2022. It was a very interesting year. I mean, that's the first thing to say. What about you, Brian? What do you think of 2022?
I think it is a pivotal year. I think people are going to look back at 2022, and they will say that this was the beginning of the end of the beginning of the end of something. We're not really sure if it's multipolarism or unipolarism. We hope it's unipolarism.
Yeah, I personally agree. I think that, in all seriousness, I think that 2022 is going to turn out to be retrospectively one of the pivotal years of our Western civilization, because it is clearly where the West decided to pursue a series of policies that have only hurt it in the short term and indeed in the long term. And also other issues too that seem to be arising as we head into 2023 is the fact that the over-indebtedness of the West is finally catching up with it. And they are no longer going to be able to print their way out of their problems as they've been doing since 2008. And so, yeah, I think that 2022 is like the beginning of the end of Western hegemony. I think that, would you dispute that?
I would say that's what it looks like. You never know. The next year could be, the Empire Strikes Back. They seem like they're on the back foot right now.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really seem feasible that, these ideas that they have to salvage all of these games that they have in play. But who knows? We should never underestimate them.
No, we can never underestimate it, because the Empire, they've got resources. And I think also too is that I think that they fundamentally sense the desperation of their position. And so I think that they're going to do their utmost to hold on to things. So if we're in looking at it in terms of conflict, this feels kind of like 1940. You know what I mean? If we're comparing it, because so many people are comparing it to World War II and, Putler and all that nonsense. Well, I think that it's sort of like the conflict has started, but it hasn't really geared up. It is gearing up for a big conflict on multiple fronts. So anyway, we're going to be discussing all of that for the next few hours, I suppose. So let us bring in our first victim. Garland Nixon, my man, how's it going? Good to see you.
Great to talk to you guys. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Definitely our pleasure, man. So what do you think of this year, 2022? And by the way, I'm gonna mute my video because I'm running around getting cigarettes and stuff like that, but I'm listening to everything. What do you think of this year?
Well, you guys hit there's so many important items. I do also believe that one of the really defining moments of 2022 is what has happened at Twitter, Elon Musk at Twitter. And that's not to say Elon Musk is a good guy or a bad guy. I hate that concept of heroes and villains. But what has happened in Twitter that has exposed what Joe Loria over at Consortium News has referred to as, and I have trouble pronouncing this, the psyopcracy, a empire that's like built on nothing but psyops, nothing but lies, nothing but psychological operations, bots, etc. And what has happened is Elon Musk has done something very similar to what Julian Assange said, not comparing him to Julian Assange, in that we would all intuitively know something. We would all intuitively know we're being had, took, lied to, bamboozled, you know the story, right? And then WikiLeaks would drop the info and we would say, aha, there it is. That's the data that substantiates what we already believe. What has happened at Twitter with the release of the Twitter files has demonstrated to the world that everything that we believed is true. And think about this, going into the 2020 election, with knowing what we know about Twitter and Facebook, etc., it's going to be interesting to watch them, because you know they can't help themselves trying to play the same games. So it's going to be interesting watching how the empire tries to play similar games when the fact of the matter is they've been outed at Twitter. I think we'll look back at the Twitter files and say that was a big deal too.
You think so, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's maybe not as, I think the conflict in Ukraine is so pivotal, but this with Twitter, it's just another, the way I see it is the credibility of Western political parties, institutions. I feel that it has been incrementally eroding. And then something like this that comes along, Twitter files, it's like a roof being blown by a windstorm. And you see it one shingle being disturbed, and then the whole roof just comes off. It's like the starting point of a much larger upheaval, I think.
What happens to me is that I tend to see it as sort of like everything that the West is supposed to stand for. We are realizing that it is truly an autocracy of this leadership class that does not want to let go. And so they control the media. They control the social media. They suppress information that is vital for a democracy to make intelligent decisions. And so this notion, sorry about that. This notion that we live in a democracy is laughable. And what's most interesting of all, it's that it's no longer, frankly, I'm speaking of myself, fringe figures, because we are fringe. We're on YouTube, we're nobodies. But it's not just us tinfoil hat brigaders. It's the wider population, the normies. Let me just mute myself. Garland, what do you think?
I agree with you. And I think another important thing here is that the Twitter files is exposing the media. It's exposing Congress. It's exposing a number of the institutions that pretended to be there to protect us or to do oversight. What have we seen with some of the members of Congress that are just clearly out there making excuses? It is clear and obvious that the FBI used the social media organizations, the media, et cetera, as a cat's paw, that they simply, use these things as tools for psychological operations. Congress, when they saw this, their oversight duty, not their oversight responsibility, their duty is to immediately say, this is illegal, we've got to do an investigation. Instead, we see members of Congress making excuses. Let me add this. Organizations, the American Civil Liberties Union, many people know I was on the board of directors of the American Civil Liberties Union for years, the National Board of Directors, a very powerful organization. A lot of people don't know how powerful this. You're talking about an organization, a nonprofit that brings in $300 million a year. That when I left, in our investments or savings, we had over $900 million. This is a gigantic organization, and they're supposed to be the ones to immediately say, hey, this is a problem. That's why I joined the ACLU, because they used to do that kind of stuff, right? They're supposed to say, this is a problem. This is government overreach. We're all over it. Not a peep out of the ACLU, but let me add this. When I was with the ACLU at our meetings, I heard the president of the ACLU say, yeah, I go to Silicon Valley and sit down with some of the billionaires, have dinner, and walk out with $3, $4, $5 million in one evening in a couple of hours. So again, this machine tentacles have gotten into these organizations that are supposed to be the institutions that hold the system accountable. And it's exposing that these institutions are either mute or they're working with these organizations, I mean, you know, FBI, government entities, whatever, to push the empire's narratives.
I had been trying to warn people about Twitter and Facebook and how it was weaponized by the US government and corporations, how it's supposed to be social media, but it was slowly transforming into programs media. I talked about how they used it as a weapon to infiltrate the information space of targeted nations. And it seems like vindication. And it's interesting you compare this to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And I'm just wondering, maybe we can reflect on how that turned out and what changes were made or weren't made in the wake of WikiLeaks. And there's all of this information now that we take for granted that, you know, WikiLeaks revealed to us all that maybe we suspected but didn't know for sure. And I think it's very similar in regards to Twitter files. I think it is a huge exposure of how this system works and how sick the system actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Garland's comparison of Julian Assange and Elon Musk, though very different animals, of course, it's correct because they're both revealing, you know, things that we all suspected were true, but didn't really know. And so many people could sort of like pretend, oh, that's not happening. That's just conspiracy theory nonsense. But now we have it in black and white. Now we have it in a way, in a format that cannot be denied. And I think that here's the thing that worries me so much is that all of the former institutions, like Garland was saying, the ACLU and other organizations that used to be the defenders of civil liberties, they're not carrying out their duties anymore because they have been co-opted by way of money and prestige and power, and it becomes a revolving door between these people who are, Garland, you were mentioning the leader of the ACLU. Yeah, where is he now? Is he at some comfy little think tank drawing like a $500 million salary? Or okay,
no, he's still there.
But you know what I'm saying? It's
exactly.
Like this revolving door between government, private sector, NGOs, think tanks, academia. You see this imbecile Brian Selter, the CNN guy, the fat balding guy with the creepy smile, because it doesn't go up, it just goes sideways, as if he's revealing his false teeth or something. And that guy wound up at Harvard, for crying out loud, and he's a blatant incompetent. And he's at Harvard, you know, in some highfalutin position, teaching kids, you know, hey kids, you want to be corrupt like me? Well, here's how you do it. You know, I mean, like, what the hell?
You know, I think, and you know, there's going to be a lot of time to cover a lot of issues, but I think what we're covering now, something we're covering now, is important. Let me bring this up. And Assange, Musk, let me bring up another name, Alex Saab. I'm going to put these things together. One of the things that Joe Biden said when Assange bought Twitter, you guys probably remember this. Biden was saying, well, you know, perhaps we ought to do an investigation into Elon Musk. Remember that? He started off by saying we might have to use lawfare against this guy. He's going against the grain. You know how we do it, right? Think about, of course, when you look at the rulings, the absurd rulings in the Assange hearings, wherein literally the government talked about plans to kidnap and murder Julian Assange, and the government, the court wouldn't take that into account and release him, which immediately it should have. But let me add one more guy, Alex Saab. Alex Saab is a Venezuelan diplomat. Clearly, he was a diplomat. He had the diplomatic papers. There was no argument that whatever you think, he was a diplomat for Venezuela. The United States kidnapped him, brought him to the U.S., took him to court. When his defense argued, they had papers from the country that he was in. He was recognized as a diplomat. The court recently ruled, you're going to love this. The court ruled that he doesn't have diplomatic immunity or diplomatic privileges because the United States recognizes Juan Guaido as president. So when you look at go to Europe, London has $1.4 billion in Venezuelan gold. By law, international law, they're supposed to give it back to them, although they steal everybody's money now. What did the court rule? They couldn't have their money back. Why? because the UK recognizes Juan Guaido. The EU doesn't. All of the people around the world that used to recognize Guaido as president are like, okay, the jig is up, the game's over, you guys do something else. But this is kind of embarrassing us all. The UK ruled, now we can't give them their money back because Guaido's recognized as a president. So the other thing that we saw, whether it's Saab, whether it's the threats to Musk, Stephen Donziger, Juan Guaido, Julian Assange, and that is that the U.S. empire now is not even embarrassed about using its lawfare. There's no hope or thought of any kind of an honest legal system. They just rule whatever they want to rule in favor of the empire. You feel like they're pulling the judges in the back room before they make their ruling, like literally, I guess the CIA or something is writing the rulings for them. Here, you go make this finding. And that's the other part of it, where it's clear that the U.S. empire, including the UK, uses lawfare to smite their enemies.
Isn't it interesting how the U.S. accuses Russia, China, and anyone else who is disobedient of undermining the rules-based international order, and yet they are one by one self-destructing every pillar that made it up, including the law, when they so blatantly trample their own rules and norms and laws? They're the ones that are actually destroying it in this desperate bid to cling to complete power, rather than allowing multipolarism, allowing this balance of power to take shape. It's incredible, and it's pure projection when they're accusing others of doing it. They are the ones destroying it.
Well, I would say this. If you understand what they mean when they say rules-based international order, they're not, because the rules-based international order is simply a self-serving racket. That's all it is. It's a self-serving racket. The rules-based international order means the U.S. empire can do anything it wants to anyone at any time to maintain hegemony. So they're working to push that. I would argue, there's been some discussion, will multipolarity arise? Will they be able to thwart it? My opinion is it's too late. That it's already here, that the fact that when the U.S. said, okay, everyone join us against Russia and the Middle East and South America and most of Asia and Turkey and Africa and all of these other countries that have, been mistreated by the U.S. for centuries, said, hey, we ain't in. No thanks. That was the demonstration that multipolarity is over, because before that, everyone would have been afraid. They'd have been, and that's what the U.S. thought. All these countries will be petrified. Look at Saudi Arabia. That's unheard of. So I think the question is not whether a multipolar order will arise. I think it is already here. It's what will the U.S. do in desperation as a dying, monster? We cross our fingers and hope that it's not the worst. I tend to keep a positive attitude, and I don't think it will be. I think the neocons, if nothing else, you'll notice none of them ever went in the military. They're all chicken hawks, and none of them want to go out in a blaze of glory. That's the one good thing I'll say about them.
Well,
earlier, go ahead.
To go back,
no, I was gonna,
to just go back quickly to a point you made, Brian, about how they accuse Russia of doing what they're doing. That's the projection of evil people who fundamentally know that what they're doing is wrong. And they try to rationalize what they are doing by ascribing it to their opponent. I'm sorry, Brian, what were you going to say?
I was listening to Garland's video earlier today, and Garland, you were talking about organized crime and how it needs stability. And I look at what the U.S. and its allies are doing, and they're creating circumstances that are not even to the benefit of their own self-preservation. Their self-preservation in general, and also the self-preservation of this system that they've benefited so much from. They're so desperate to cling to what they have, and so unimaginative about other ways of existing on Earth, that they are actually jeopardizing the stability they need for their system to continue surviving.
Brian, why do you think that they're undermining their own stability?
It's out of desperation and a lack of better options. I think they're out of time.
Because I mean, in my own life, in my own life, when things are a little bit unstable, when things are not going my way, I try to go back to my strengths as opposed to embark on new adventures. But these guys seem to be doing the exact opposite. I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming that most people act like I do. When things aren't going so well, some relationship blows up or some deal doesn't go through, I try to like regroup. But they don't. They go forward. Garland?
Well, yeah, let's be frank about it. We're talking about sociopaths. So if you're not a sociopath, you certainly wouldn't react in the same, or psychopaths, because of the level of violence, you certainly wouldn't react like these people. They're pure ideologues. And the term in psychology that you guys were talking about, there's a term, deny, project, attack. It's not me. It's you, and I'm going to attack. You project your weaknesses onto your anybody you can, and then you attack that weakness in other people because you can't admit it into yourself, and that's what you do. I've likened the neocons in Washington and in the UK to a drowning man who's in the water, and he's just splashing around, and he's reaching to grab anything, any piece of wood, anything he can grab, he'll grab a hold of to try to pull himself up. Unfortunately, if I used to do search and rescue on the Bay, if you know anything about saving a person, if you're close enough, they'll grab you, and if you don't know what you're doing, and take you to the bottom and drown you. And that's what's happening with the EU. See, that's another big issue too. The EU, it's being revealed, something that was a reality all along. The people in Europe thought they had independence. They thought they were sovereign. And we're finding out that they are just pure colonies with no sovereignty whatsoever. And rather than leaders in Europe, what they have is governors, what they have is viceroys for the US empire there to do. If the empire says, I want you to destroy this colony, their job is to destroy the colony, and their job is to make sure that the people in the colony don't know that they're complicit in doing it. So that's part of this. The US is desperate, so it's grabbing Europe and holding on to Europe. It's dragging Europe right down with it. And the people in Europe, one other thing, I think this comes back to one thing. How does this get fixed? All of that comes back to me. How does this get fixed? Because the problems are at the head. The people themselves. Go ahead, Gonzalo.
Yeah, because what you're saying, how to fix this, I don't think that the people have the will to do it anymore. I think that the tipping point has passed, the point of no return. It's like an airplane that doesn't have enough gas to get to its destination, and once it passes that point of no return, and nothing that they do is going to really save the fact of the plane crashing. I mean, Brian, do you agree, or you think that there is some sort of solution?
I'm not really sure, but I kind of want to build on something Garland was talking about. As analysts, I think a lot of us focused on the fact that Ukraine from 2014 onward lost its sovereignty to this US engineered coup. And the government in Kiev, the client regime in Kiev, no longer represented Ukraine and its best interests, not even its elite's best interests, represented Washington's best interests at the cost of Ukraine, including the Ukrainian elite. What a lot of us, I feel, at least myself, I kind of understated how much of a reality that is for the rest of Europe. Garland, you were saying they're like viceroys. They absolutely are. I think a lot of people forget that the people running the EU and the individual countries in them, most of them do not represent the best interest of those countries, those people, or even the corporations and business interests in Europe. They represent Washington at the cost of Europe. And I think now more than ever, 2022 has helped illustrate this undeniably. There's no way you can look at what they're doing in Europe right now and say, yes, they're making decisions that suit their best interests.
And now that the cat is out of the bag, politics in Europe can never be the same. Politics in Europe can never be the same. Now that the so-called liberal class, right, have revealed themselves as aligning themselves with pure fascists, pure globalist fascists. They've assigned themselves. The funny thing about the Ukrainian Nazis is they're globalist Nazis. They're not the kind of Nazis that say our country's the best and we love our country. They say we want to be the worldwide leaders of all Nazis. No wonder they align with the globalists. They're actually globalist Nazis. So there's a nice little alignment there. But the liberal order in the US and in Europe has been revealed for what it is, an ultra liberal I mean, I got to use the word fascist as a guy to keep in mind something. I was in the Democratic Party, a diehard Democrat, up until I started having questions 2016, when I was like a Bernie guy. He was something different. In the US, it was Bernie and Trump. And I was at Fox News at the time. I was on Fox. I was at Fox News all the time. And I had people at Fox coming in telling me, yeah, I'm from Ohio. I came back. These were conservatives. And they were saying the people where I grew up said they'll vote for Bernie or Trump, but they don't want to vote for Hillary. And but the bottom line is they wanted something different, and they were willing to reach in any direction they can. I think you're going to see that sentiment arise. I don't know if there'll be reform parties or what in Europe, but I think you're going to see that kind of sentiment and start to rise. And I think that's very healthy.
Gonzalo, you had asked me.
Uh-oh, did we lose Brian?
No, did we lose Garland? Do you hear me?
I'm here. I'm still here.
Okay. I thought it was me again because twice I've gone out, and Brian is frozen there in a very thoughtful expression. We'll tease him about it later. But yeah, sorry, I dropped out, so I kind of like missed the conversation.
We were talking about Europe, right? And I was saying that now that it's been revealed to Europe.
Well, the thing that I found shocking about the European situation was that the Americans blew up Nord Stream. That's obvious. It was obvious from the get-go. The mainstream media tried to push this nonsense that it was the Russians who did it, which is absurd. And finally now they're saying, oh, yeah, it looks like the Russians didn't do it. But who did it? It must have been Santa Claus or the Martians. You know, who knows? We all know who did it. And the Europeans are just taking it. And so to claim that the European leadership has any interest in the welfare of the people is absurd. They look at the people as as a group of people who have to be pacified and controlled, but never taken into account insofar as the decisions are concerned. Europe is not a democracy. None of the European nations are democracies. The only one I can think of offhand that really is a democracy at this point is probably Serbia and Hungary. And of course, they're on the naughty list. Why are they on the naughty list? Because they are actually representing and looking after the best interests of the people. And by the way, we're up to 3,000 concurrent viewers. Chat, thank you so much for you all watching. I'd appreciate it if you tossed around the link so that more people can join us. So I'm sorry, Brian, you froze out.
Yeah.
It was
I don't know what happened there.
You looked very funny.
I'm sure I did. There's really no flattering way for me to freeze in mid speech. But anyway, I was saying that the circle of interest driving U.S. foreign policy, I believe they're going to have to diminish in strength or collapse, and that new circles of interest that are more interested in working with the rest of the world rather than imposing themselves upon the rest of the world, they will have to displace them, replace them, overcome the amount of influence that these entrenched monopolies have. I think that's when things will change, and that's when you may see political parties come forward that actually represent these interests. Because right now, I just feel, especially in the United States, I feel like politics is still theater, and these special interests still have overwhelming control over how the script unfolds. And I think no matter who comes into a system like that, they really don't have a chance to make any changes. You have to uproot that deep state that is running everything.
I think something else that's important. So here in DC, we're going to have a February the 19th. There's going to be an anti-war rally, Rage Against the War Machine. And it's put together by what? The People's Party, which the People's Party is a left party. They were former Bernie people, lefties like me, unabashed lefties, and libertarians. Right. So we're seeing people who have ideological differences starting to come together saying, hey, we got bigger fish to fry. I do believe, and I'm seeing more and more of that. I always was that kind of person. Part of it, well, I guess, because I was in law enforcement, and in law enforcement, I was a lefty, but 90% of the people were conservative. So the people that were my fishing buddies and bowling partners and all, they were all, a lot of my friends were very conservative. We got along well. We were the best of friends and what have you. And then I went to Fox News for all of those years, and I was good friends with all the people at Fox that you were supposed to despise. And what do you know? I found out that just because you don't agree with someone ideologically means you have to hate them. And now it appears to me that this but the dynamics in the U.S. are starting to push that more than ever. That I think the machine is very much afraid of that. And we're seeing, I think one of the things that this big rally, we'll see how big it is, Rage Against the War Machine, is just trying to bring in everybody that's possible. I think the way to build an anti-war movement, because we need one in the US particularly, is, hey man, everybody who, whatever spectrum you are, none of us want to die in a nuclear war. I've said this for a while. I'm a lefty. Now, if I'm in Europe, where do I want to live? France or Hungary? You know what I mean? Okay, Viktor Orban's on the right, but he is paying attention to the needs. He is addressing the needs of his people. Give me a practical leader. People now, I mean, you just have to, you want a practical leader that's looking out for the needs of their country. And I think while we say left and right or libertarian and People's Party or whatever, I think what we're really talking about is people who are practical, who say, you know, people need a roof over their head and food and basic things like that, and we need to stay out of nuclear war. And I think maybe we'll start to build a group of people who don't agree with on everything, but they agree that we should act sensibly, reasonably in our best interest and in accordance with the written laws that we have, at least the Constitution and the written laws we have. We should try to act in accordance with them.
I think also too that I mean, like in my own case, I'm a hardcore conservative. I make no bones about it, right? But I look at this leadership class and I'm completely alienated from them. I think that what they're doing is really despicable, because it's not so much that, you know, I'm in favor of big business or something like that. I'm in favor of real competition. I'm in favor of corporations actually having to compete with one another for market shares, as opposed to this monopolistic practice that has been engendered throughout private industry. I'm against the monopoly of power that has emerged in Washington, insofar as that you have the uniparty, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And so what I also find really dispiriting is that traditionally the left has always been the source of change, which is understandable, because the left, they are usually the agglomeration of people who feel disenfranchised, aggrieved, they want change. I mean, that's the whole point of the left traditionally. I'm talking since the French Revolution. They want change. But what has happened is that the monoparty has essentially co-opted the left and uses the left sort of like shock troops. And so the only people who are kind of like left over, who are really opposed to this, are people who tend to be more conservative. And it's not so much that they are conservative, it's rather they want to go back to the way things were, conservative in that sense. And so sometimes you find people like yourself, Garland, who are politically on the left, but you want to go back to the way things were, a more just society. And yet what has happened is that the monoparties, the monopolistic practices at the government level, at the corporate level, at the institutional level of academia and the media, it has co-opted the left. It uses the language of the left. So you think, oh, this change that we are experiencing, this monopolistic, this drive towards monopoly, towards centralization of power, it seems to be emanating from the left, but I don't think it's emanating from the left. I think that they have co-opted the left to neuter it. And therefore, that's why we're not having change. And therefore, my fear is that people on the right will agglomerate and really explode in frustration and grievance. And that will be a bit of a nightmare. Brian, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to agree with Garland about the need for being practical. An ideology should be like a guiding star. It's a direction that you want to head toward, but you don't follow it literally. Like if you're walking straight and you see a bottomless swamp filled with snakes, you don't walk through it. You try to find a practical way around it to get back on track. And I think so many people in America, and this is because the media deliberately encourages this sort of radical division among different groups, this inability to compromise, and this inability to recognize common ground and work there. I kind of had the same experience when I was doing design projects. These were projects for like helping farmers or something like that. You have all of these people with these technical skills come together. None of us talked about our politics. And I knew some of those people. They had the exact opposite of me, or they hated me. I was writing under a pen name at the time, and they didn't know who I was, but they hated my pen name. And yet we were able to come together and work on these pragmatic solutions to these problems without ever even discussing politics. And I think people need to be able to do that. And I think it's encouraging if there are even small groups of people starting to get together and do that.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what your
that,
ism is. Yeah.
It's great that people are coming together, but the question becomes, how do they relieve, if you will, the people who are currently in power, who have such a death grip on power? Because you think of the late 19th century and a lot of the reform movements, labor reform movements and so forth, I mean, that's why Teddy Roosevelt got elected. I mean, there was a sense that the democratic machinery would be responsive to the people. But now there's no such belief whatsoever. And on top of that, there are a number of people, myself included, who do not think that the last 3 elections, 22, 20, and 18, were on the level. And so this is a widespread notion. And once you start losing faith in the system that can elicit change, and that loss of illusion becomes widespread enough, anything can happen. I mean, anything. Okay, I've seen it up close and personal in Latin America, when the people feel that their just grievances are just not being addressed, and there's no rational legal mechanism to address those concerns. You see what I mean? And that's why I'm so scared about what might happen in the West, let alone their foreign adventures, which are pathetic, stupid. But I mean, what's going to happen in the United States? If you told me that there's not going to be the election of 2024 is going to be suspended and there's going to be some sort of civil war in the United States by 2025, 2026, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. That's how pessimistic I am about the future. Garland, are you on the same page in that, or are you more hopeful in some regard?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm hopeful, but let me say this. Let's face it, this is a country, when we say the election, when we talk about legitimate elections, this is a country where the CIA literally killed the president. This is 1968. It is widely believed that there was miscreant activity afoot regarding the Nixon campaign and any potential Vietnam resolutions for peace. 1980, it is widely believed that there is kind of well known that the Reagan people and the CIA were acting regarding the Iranian issue, right? So it's not new that the CIA, that there's meddling, that there are things going on in and around the presidential elections that would cause one to have great pause as to whether or not they're legitimate. So I think what's happening is this, rather than, oh my gosh, things are going on in the election that are freaking us out. I think people are being awakened to a reality in America that's been going on. They were asleep thinking, oh, this is some great democracy and everything's fine. And people are being awakened to a reality rather than a new reality, an existing reality. What do you think?
I agree with that 100%. That really is. I mean, people, the propaganda machine worked so well. And then I would say with the internet and people able to, again, this is the playing field being leveled. This is what multipolarism is all about. You had these powerful monopolies and the media under such strict control. Why? Because 50 years ago, you had to be a millionaire. You had to have a printing press. You needed a studio. You needed staff. Now, one guy with a webcam can reach the same number of people as one of these big media operations. And that is helping level the playing field. You have to think, why is multipolarism gaining so much traction? Is it because Russia and China just complain about what the US is doing? No, they're creating entire alternatives to this system, these deeply entrenched monopolies across a whole spectrum of areas: media, manufacturing, all types of technology, all kinds of services and businesses. They have an alternative that other people can invest in, pay into, rather than feeding this monster that has been growing all of these decades. That's what multipolarism is. It is a balance of power. It's evening things out. And as Americans, we kind of have to think about how we can do that. We know who these corrupt monopolies are. How can we direct our money away, our time, our attention away from them and into alternatives, say in our local communities or in our state, and try to level the playing field a little bit. And then there will be opportunities for people to come forward and challenge the status quo in terms of what's going on in Washington.
Now, Garland, can I ask you something unrelated to this discussion? But I'm kind of curious. What happened to Kanye? I haven't heard a peep out of Kanye, or has he been completely silenced?
I think that right now, Kanye, they've got big other things that work for them. The reality is Kanye's a rich guy. In my opinion, has certain issues, but he's just a person that has a right to say whatever the hell he wants, as far as I'm concerned. And when it is of value to the machine to use Kanye to beat him around a little bit, or to go after him, or to say he's the latest, God only knows why. I guess he's a white supremacist now, but whatever it is, they need to go after Kanye, they do. So right now, that particular tool has no value. Maybe in a couple weeks or something, or a couple of months, when they need to go after Kanye again, boom, they'll go. He's always said over the top stuff. Is it that he has issues? Is it that he's really good at PR? I don't know what it is, but he's just another Hollywood, very wealthy person saying stuff to me, as far as I'm concerned. And I don't see him as a big, it's like Michael Jackson, Lindsay Lohan, over the course of the last several years, that stuff that, is useful to keep people distracted when they need it.
The reason I'm asking is that because when the first conversations that he had, outbursts that he had, call them what you will, I noticed that a lot of people in the African American community were sort of like nodding along. And I'm wondering if they've sort of like not just merely deplatformed him and torpedoed his fortune, but really tried to silence him wholesale. Because, perhaps thinking to themselves, Kanye is articulating what we do not want to be widespread among the African American community. And so I'm genuinely curious.
I do think, yes, there are discussions, particularly around certain Middle Eastern nations that are of, could be quite embarrassing to the status quo of the United States. Their unsinkable aircraft carrier has some issues right now in the Middle East, as Alexander Haig called it. And I think they're very much afraid that they could have a discussion in the Black community. Keep in mind something, the Democratic Party cynically uses the Black community, cynically uses their connections, their ability to maintain, because let me just say this, if you got to understand it, in the Black community, that traditionally Black community has voted one of two ways, either for the Democrat or against the Republican. And now the only thing they vote is against the Republican, because the Democrats are offering them nothing. And that's getting starting to waver. Because as you know, I do a radio show in Washington, D.C. on a Pacifica station that's mostly Black, a large Black following, and I do another one in L.A. And the callers that I hear more and more from the Black community feel like, why is the United States sending all of this money to Ukraine when we have homeless and poor? You know what you're hearing, and you're hearing it heavily in the Black community. So I think there's great concern in the mainstream power circles that they could be losing their grip on the Black community. They just feel like politically they don't have anywhere else to go, and we'll keep scaring them with the Republicans. It's going to be interesting to see how that turns out over the long term also.
Brian?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think they're losing their grip on a lot of different groups, and they don't know what else to do, because the only actual solution is for them to stop all of this and adopt a more rational structure for everything they want to do going forward. But they cannot. They're so deeply invested in this. They don't. We've all had conversations, I think, on these roundtables about the nature of the leadership class, how out of touch with the reality they are, how their education is impractical, their life experience is impractical. They have no experience to do the things that they're doing. Qualified people should be doing this, and they're digging their hole, and it's getting deeper and deeper. And someone that has already dug themselves so deeply, are they the type of person that can stop and think of a plausible way of getting out of that hole? And I think the answer is no. And I think we're going to see a lot of that.
Yeah. So the word is, for someone who does that, it's almost like what happens to a person who's a severe alcoholic or heroin addict. What happens to them? Collapse. The word collapse is the only thing that can happen. So for them now, does that mean that the U.S. empire collapses? Does that mean that their hold on power in the U.S. collapses? That a reform party or new people or the U.K. start to arise, and because that's a possibility. That the credibility of these neocons, one of the things they've done with this Ukraine project is put their credibility on the line. What happens not if, when this thing falls apart, either when this thing collapses, when it gets to a point where it's not viable, what happens? A lot of people talk about, well, will they add more? Will they attack more? At some point, I think the Ukrainian military, political, and economic infrastructure all collapse. At that point, there's nothing to prop up. There's nobody to send any more weapons to because the situation collapses. So I think their Ukraine project collapses, with it their credibility. And the question is, what did they do? Everything's collapsing around them, and they can't even use the Twitter, Facebook stuff anymore because that's been outed. And everybody's like, yeah, we know, we understand what Facebook's going to do or whatever. And God forbid, Twitter, people can actually say things on there now that they weren't formally allowed to say.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't know. I'm thinking about what will happen when their Ukraine project collapses. We've actually seen this very recently with Afghanistan. They were able to just pretend like it never happened. 20 years, never happened. We never hear anything about Afghanistan anymore. And long before that was the Vietnam War. And think of how heavily invested they were in the government in South Vietnam. And then it was gone. And
like it never happened.
And then they just kept going. And so I'm wondering what they're going to do after Ukraine. I think they're going to try to do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
The problem is, as the time goes by, because all of these projects together are meant to encircle and contain Russia and China. But each year that goes by that they fail to do that, Russia and China get stronger and stronger. So you can see their attempts to encircle and contain are going in one direction, and Russia and China are going in another direction.
I think it's
they're diverging.
I think it's worse than that. It's noticeable that every effort that they make to encircle and crush the Russians just makes them stronger. I mean, they're the very definition of anti-fragility. You know, the sanctions. What happened? Did it blow up the Russian economy? No, it blew up the European economy. You know, forcing the Russians' hands insofar as going into Ukraine with the SMO. Did that weaken the Russians? No, it got them stronger militarily. Did it weaken Putin and the Kremlin? No, it made them stronger, more popular at home. I mean, it's really like the gang that couldn't shoot straight. Everything that they do winds up benefiting the people that they're trying to quote unquote crush. I have come to the conclusion that, you know, they're the reverse Midas touch. You know, Midas was the king that everything he touched turned to gold. Now I call it the Biden touch. Everything he touches turns to shit. That's pretty much what's going on. Am I wrong, Garland?
I agree with you. There's another great short story called The Monkey's Paw, which is interesting. It's like an evil genie kind of thing. You know, you ask for something and you get it, but it's like in the worst possible way. It's, you know, but the bottom line is they wanted this war in Ukraine. They got it.
They got it.
They got it. But unfortunately, in the worst possible way. And what's interesting, too, is we got to look at this. That is that this talk about, coming to some kind of a negotiated end or anything like that, right? If that would happen, if this thing ends in a way that the neocons don't win, which it will, that's it. Because what they're practicing here is the Wolfowitz doctrine. You guys, I'm sure you're familiar with that, right? From 2000, 2001, wherein no other world power, not even a regional power, is allowed to arise powerful enough that it could push back against U.S. world hegemony, right? And this is about, okay, Russia and China and eventually India and some other countries that they're eyeing in the long run start to rise. Now they've got to push them back down. They got to push. They're at war with modernity, because reality about modernity is other countries rise. People get jobs. Sometimes poor people get a job and they're not poor anymore. Things like that happen in this world, right? But they've got to stop this. And if they don't stop Russia, that means that it doesn't work anymore. that means that a power is rising. They tried to stop it and they were unable to. End of the Wolfowitz doctrine. End of unipolarity is already gone, but it becomes blatantly obvious. That's what they're up against. That's why they're so dangerous. But again, I don't think that they'll go to that end of, doing us all in for a number of reasons. But the bottom line is I think that's what we're looking at in 2023. That's why it's such a big year coming up. It is the end of the death of the Wolfowitz doctrine is upon us, which means at that point, what does the U.S. empire do? If they say to now they say to their vassals in Europe, all right, now we're going after China to do the same thing in Russia. They're going to have problems. Wait a minute. Yeah, exactly what you're going to do. You're going to do the same thing, only worse. They're not going to have the coalition. Their coalition is going to be weak and wiped out. It's going to be an interesting year. But the bottom line is this. The U.S. loses its war. The U.S. empire, I always call it the U.S. empire, loses its war against modernity. It becomes the Chihuahua barking at the tractor trailer as it drives by this year.
Yeah. And by the way, I just have to point out to the fact, a lot of people in chat are saying that Brian is drinking beer and he's going to be drunk by the end of the broadcast. Brian,
it's literally actually just water.
It's
not even tea. It's not even tea today. It's just water.
And if it were, and he got drunk, he'd probably make the most sense out of all of us. We've all sat around with cups of beers with friends and hatched up the most brilliant ideas.
Yeah, that's the worst part about Brian. That's why I kind of hate the guy, because even if he's drunk, he's making more sense than I ever will. That's just fucking annoying at this point. But anyway, seriously, the thing that I'm noticing is that the Western, the Washington mono party, the people who are running things in Washington right now on a foreign policy level, over the last 24 months, really, they have gone out of their way to to encircle Russia. I mean, first of all, they had the Kazakhstan situation, the color revolution there that the Russians put down. Then we have some weird noises coming out of, we had the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, clearly started by the West, egged on by the West. We had, for a while, there was noises about Kaliningrad, that they were going to cut it off somehow. Now we have the issue going on in Kosovo, which is totally artificial. And they are trying to basically corner Serbia into doing what exactly? Giving them an excuse to do another 1999 bombing on Serbia. That's what it seems like at this point, to tell you the truth. Everything that they tried to do. Oh, and remember it was 2020 or 2019, 2020, when they tried to do the color revolution in Belarus. They are constantly trying to stir up trouble. And the issue becomes, how could I put it? When will this end? Other than the complete destruction, the complete failure of the West. And my thinking is that the more they try and the more they fail, the more they wind up reaching for the nuclear button. That's my underlying concern. See, all of this would be laughable to me were it not for the fact that there is such a thing as an ICBM, lots of them out in cornfields in Iowa or wherever, that can cause all kinds of havoc. And these people are irresponsible. That's the worst part. They are irresponsible and they have inherited a power that they did not earn. And so they are like trust fund babies splurging on the credit card, on the money that was left to them by better people, quite frankly. And now they're going to do all kinds of insanity. That's my real fear. I cannot believe, 2 years ago, if I'd been told that I'd be saying this, I'm actually worried about nuclear war, I was like, come on, that's never going to happen. But now, and not because of the Russians or the Chinese, who at least are responsible. It's these goddamn people in in Washington and the leadership classes of the West who are completely irresponsible. And in their desperation, they might pull the trigger. That's my fear. And a chill came over the room.
Oh, I thought right.
Well, I don't know what they'll do in regards to nuclear weapons. We would hope that they're at least smart enough to realize if you do that, Russia, China, they're well aware of who really runs the West, and they know who to go and get if that were to happen. And they have nuclear weapons also. That is the thing about nuclear weapons. I think they still have a lot of cards to play. I think they can stretch this out very, very long, even if the vector sum is them losing. I look at Southeast Asia here, for example. The countries in this region, the governments are very well aware of how the U.S. does its meddling, but they still have not taken the measures to stop them from doing that. So they are infecting the societies here in Southeast Asia with this political meddling. They influence the elections. They still manage to get their client regimes into power, and they could keep instability going for quite a while. They could continue creating a mess, because this is what they do excel at. It's so much easier to destabilize and destroy than it is to build.
Yes.
And the US knows that. And of course, China and Russia know that, because they're the ones building rather than trying to destroy. So it's kind of depressing in a way, but also because they have additional options to play, hopefully that'll keep them distracted from thinking about nuclear annihilation for a little bit longer.
By the way, we're up to 4,100 concurrent viewers. Chat, thank you so much. And like I said before, if you guys want to pass around the link to this video, please feel free to any and all. And by the way, for technical reasons, I can't put the links to Garland's channel, but Garland Nixon is on YouTube. And as soon as the broadcast is over, I'll put up his link as well as the link of Brian's channel, The New Atlas, and all the other guests who may or may not show up. Okay? Okay, I'm sorry, Garland, I interrupted you.
No, but I think one of the interesting things about all of the attempted coups that you named were that they were attempted coups. It seems to me that when the U.S. and their allies or vassals, whatever the case, attempted to overthrow the government of Syria, and Russia stepped in 2000, whatever that was. 14, 15, whenever they came in, that was kind of the end of the coup. Now, as Brian said, they can cause mayhem, they can get kind of client regimes in, and they can, do various things, but the old, I'm just going to go in and overthrow this country. So what they do, what happened in Iran recently. In Iran, they go in there, they get some protests going for a while, maybe a few terrorist attacks, and then it dies down. Hong Kong, China, wherever. So now the infamous, I think to me, one of the things that signaled the level of incompetence in their coup mongering was the infamous Bay of Piglets in Venezuela, where they sent like 40 or 50 schmucks on Boston whalers like 50 idiots are going to go ashore and somehow make their way to the capital and doing the president. And they were taken out by fishermen. Literal, a bunch of fishermen saw them, went back, got their guns, killed most of them in a shootout, and then grabbed the rest of them. At that point, you got to look at it and say, yeah, the old coup machine sure ain't what it used to be. And I think that's the other thing about it is the level of incompetence. They can't even, this is what they do. If you're in a country and you see a bunch of protests start, you're like, well, the coup mongers are starting. You let you send you usher the people around. The protests are going to last 3 or 4 weeks. There'll be lots of social media crap about it. There'll be some tires burning, and then it'll be gone. The days that the U.S. could do a decent coup are gone. But we do have to hide the fact that there are a lot of tires burning in France right now. Don't want to see all of the people in Europe that are burning tires and pushing things around. We got to hide that.
Hey, so we have Alex Christoforou is in the stream rather. Alex, how's it going? Good to see you, my friend.
Doing well. Good to see you, Gonzalo, Brian, Garland. Good to be here. How's everyone doing?
Pretty good. We're talking about the Western leadership class and that they're basically bastards that we hate. Basically, that's the conclusion. And I'm the total black pill. I'm saying that there is no solution. Just let it all burn down, and let's just hope that there's no nuclear Armageddon. And Brian and Garland are kind of like on the fence about that because they recognize that there isn't an easy mechanism to get rid of this monopolistic leadership class. So, what are your thoughts?
When the dollar stops being the reserve currency, choke off the funding, it all ends.
Yeah, that's my thinking as well. I think that once the dollar really craters and the inflation in the United States is through the roof, that's when I think that they're not going to be able to hold up this house of cards anymore. And they're going to have so many domestic problems that they're just going to have to stamp those domestic problems out before they worry about other people's situation. And I think that the Saudi Arabia thing is the way the Saudis are clearly and vigorously aligning themselves with China and Russia, I don't think that augurs well. Do you agree, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in the cards. It's inevitable now that you're going to have this multipolar world. You're going to have different systems, a different World Bank, a different IMF, different everything. A completely different architecture, financial architecture, and you're going to have a lot of countries that are going to really be interested in that. A different SWIFT. I mean, they did it to themselves, to be quite honest. They took the nuclear options, the oil price caps, the gas price caps, kicking Russia out of SWIFT, seizing foreign currency reserves. I mean, they did it to themselves. And so, these, just because you sanction countries and you kick them off of these platforms and kick them out of these institutions and stuff like this, it doesn't mean that they're just going to sit there and just sit in a corner and cry and not do anything. I mean, we're talking about, big countries. We're talking about civilizations that have lasted for thousands of years. They're gonna look for alternatives, and now they've got alternatives in BRICS and the SCO, and other things are going to be coming up. Alternatives to SWIFT, alternatives to Visa and MasterCard. And so, I think once the West doesn't have the money anymore to fund all of these adventures, it's going to have to start to focus inwards. It's going to have a choice. It's going to say, do we continue to spend what little money we have trying to get regime change in Iran, or do we spend what money we have here at home? And that's what's going to happen.
Let me make one more comment. I got to leave in a couple minutes, so I'll make one quick comment just so you'll know. So a friend of mine is from Northern California. He went up to Oakland, San Francisco area recently. He said, number one, when you ride down the side streets, there's RVs, cars, tents where people are living in everywhere. He said there was and I'll mention the name of it. My friend said, there was this diner I used to always go to for breakfast called the Great Bear Diner. He said, and I said, hey, I'm going to the Great Bear Diner. And his friend said, don't do that. He said, why? They said, because if you go in there, by the time you order your omelet, your car will be stolen. They said, but there's good news. He said, what's that? If your car is stolen, the criminals that steal cars there at night, they pull behind the diner and they go through the stuff and they throw it out. So you have people who get their cars stolen and they'll come rummage through the goods at night and find something that was in their car, maybe that they wanted that the criminals got rid of. You see my point where I'm going with this. The United States economically is collapsing. And so we're turning into this country that has a big fist and nothing else. And so at some point, in the same way that Europe is going to have to deal with this internal turmoil and economic collapse, the US is going to have to deal with that also. And if you look around here, I mean, my office is in DC, right around the corner from the White House. And when you ride around in DC, there are a lot of these squares, these like green 1-block squares that's a little like park, right? They're like covered in tents now. So I got to get ready to go, but I just wanted to leave that with you guys, man. It is a mess here. The homelessness is out of control. Crime and all that stuff. What a lot of people call crimes of desperation. Once people start getting hungry and they have no jobs, they're stealing stuff. The drugs go up. Everything goes up. That's the direction the U.S. is going. I suspect that's the direction the EU is going, and it's going to be hard to run the world when you're, running from criminals in your own community. Thanks a lot, guys. I got to run. I certainly appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, go ahead.
Before you go, I just want to introduce you to Ian Miles Cheong. Great Twitter presence, still great on Twitter. Ian, how's it going? And I hope
Good.
that you and Garland can get in touch sometime.
We've met. I mean, we've spoken before.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I interviewed him before.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought I was like making matchmaker here, and you guys have been dating already. Oh, well, I hope it was friendly and fun.
Yeah, definitely. It was great. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Take care, Garland.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Yeah.
I forget who said I was. It may have been Garland, because I was listening to one of his programs earlier today, and he compared, or maybe it was you, Alex. I'm not sure, but they compared it to a kid holding their breath until they get what they want. But, like they're going to hold their breath until Russia does what they want. But it's not Russia that's not getting any oxygen. So it is, and who does that? Children do that. But we're talking about actual nations, entire blocks of nations acting in this way. They're sanctioning themselves.
That's why it's so funny. That's why it's so
sense.
funny. That's why it's so funny, man. I mean, if it were not for the nukes, it would be screamingly funny. Come on.
Yeah, or all the wars that they've got.
People freezing to death in winter.
All the death and destruction. But apart from that, it would still be funny.
It would be like the subject of a comedy, right? Like a TV show or a movie. Something like that would be funny, but this is real life, and they're acting like children.
But Ian, if it was a TV show and this wasn't actually going on, people would say, well, this is a ridiculous storyline.
Yeah,
this is so unrealistic. Nobody would ever do that.
It's unrealistic. The characters are too stupid. It's like, well, real life is worse.
And too hard-headed and too monomaniacal in their direction. See, I a former writer, wrote in Hollywood, wrote novels and stuff. No editor of mine would ever accept the storyline because it doesn't seem reasonable. These people who are supposed to be so smart, so Ivy League and all the rest of it, they're so stupid. How can this be? It doesn't make any sense.
But they think they're smart.
Yeah.
They do.
They think they're smart, and they really do.
The Atlantic Council. I'm smart.
They really do think they're smart. Yeah, and they think their whole group is smart.
Yep.
They think these institutions are smart, and they think they're playing 5 and 6 and 8D chess and all of these things. And you saw that the other day with Rishi Sunak at the soup kitchen.
Oh God, that was funny.
Oh, yeah. That was amazing.
I mean, you see how detached they are from regular life and from the suffering of people and the problems that people have.
Why don't you work in finance?
Yeah, Ian, why don't you tell chat the story so that they're up to speed?
Okay, so Rishi Sunak was volunteering, it's a photo op at a soup kitchen in the UK for homeless people. And this homeless guy walks in and, gets some soup, and Rishi strikes up a conversation and asks him what he does for work. Well, he says, I'm homeless. I don't have a job. And Rishi starts talking about the economy, of all things. The economy, he says, you could get a job in finance. And the guy says, well, I just want to make sure I have a roof over my head this Christmas because it's freezing. Implying that he's probably going to freeze to death unless he has some shelter. And Rishi just sort of blows him off. It's just so out of touch. You just can't conceive of the idea that a person could be homeless and that they wouldn't have a roof above their heads. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. I mean, this is late stage French Empire kind of stuff, Brian.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say these people don't understand how the world actually works, and they're in charge. They're actually, kind of in a way, in charge of it.
No, not kind of in a way.
Look,
they are in charge.
They're waging
leaders.
They're waging a proxy war against Russia, and they don't understand the concept of to fight a war you need bullets. That this
they don't even have bullets.
The simplest concept, and they don't grasp it. It's like Vanderlei talking about 100,000 officers dead. They don't know the first thing about these things that they're deeply involved in and are making the final, or we're told are making the final decisions on these things. And it's a disaster, and it's exactly what you expect. And everyone in their own personal life has met someone incompetent doing something they shouldn't have been in charge of something they shouldn't have been in charge of. And they saw what the outcome was, and it was always a predictable disaster. And now this is happening on a global scale.
They filled up.
That's what it seems like.
Their whole ecosystem is this bubble.
Yeah,
their whole ecosystem.
I have to point out something that a lot of people on the commentary community have lit on Ursula von der Leyen's comment of 100,000 officers, not because of the number, because we all suspected it was roughly that much, and she confirmed it. But the fact that she used the word officer instead of military personnel, because of course, and to those of you who don't know, we're neck deep in this stuff, of course. To those of you who don't know, an officer is of the officer corps, but you don't say, 100,000 killed men. You say, you say 100,000 military personnel killed or men killed, but you don't say officers because that's a reduced subsection of the military.
Yep. She's not mentioning the larger numbers.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, see, what pisses us all off is that, see, Ursula von der Leyen, before she was EU Commissioner President, she was the Minister of Defense of Germany. So she didn't even know the difference between an officer and an enlisted man. That's the thing that it's just like, what the hell, man?
She was an awful Minister of Defense, and absolutely awful. And you have parliament members and former ministers of Germany on record on various articles saying as much, that she was a complete disaster. But why did she get that position? Because Angela Merkel put her there. That was the deal. The deal was Germany gets the Commission and France gets the ECB with Lagarde. That was the deal that they put in place.
And Lagarde is another incompetent. I mean, she's an idiot.
But they're going to get the what's her face, Freeland, right? Chrystia Freeland's going to lead NATO next year
for NATO. Yeah, most
You're
likely.
kidding? Wait. Are you for real?
Yeah, for real. Like the State Department, the U.S. State Department, and the Biden administration have put her name in the ring. They want her to be the leader of NATO next year.
Chrystia Freeland is a literal Nazi.
She's a literal Nazi. She marches with the Banderites.
Perfect fit.
No, her grandfather was an actual Nazi.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, and she is going to lead NATO. Mm-hmm. Oh my God! I mean,
it is the perfect script.
Lost cause.
Oh,
it is the perfect script.
My God, that's insane. Chrystia Freeland is neck deep with this Banderites. Her grandfather was an actual Nazi, like a SS officer or something like that. I actually
he was the chief propagandist of the Ukrainian newspaper that was put up by the Nazis. He worked under Joseph Goebbels. Yeah. Goebbels.
Yeah. And she's going to lead NATO.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God! I'm sorry, man.
If you look at who's in charge of everything in NATO or in the State Department,
I missed this, by the way.
There's a lot of there's so many Ukrainians in there. It's kind of weird, right? Like people who have worked for the Ukrainian government, like Victoria Nuland, for instance. She's Ukrainian. Wow, what a surprise!
Jesus, I mean, I'm sorry. I'm shocked about this news because I didn't actually know this. And that shows, what a loser I am that I lost track of this information. But Jesus, I mean, no.
The worst person who could lead NATO would be Chrystia Freeland, and that's who they want in charge because it means endless war against Russia. I mean, the whole idea here is not to let Ukraine win. They don't care about Ukraine. Ukraine could literally lose half its population, and they'd be like, no, we're going to fight to the last man because we got to dismantle Russia. I mean, that's the goal, right? Dismantling Russia. Nothing else.
Yeah.
They don't care.
Dismantling Russia, breaking it up. And the thing is, see, that they've said so many times that they finally convinced the Russian people. And so the Russian people themselves feel that this is an existential war. And that it's not against Ukraine. It's against NATO. And they're going to fight to the last man. I mean, they're not going to lose this fight. And I mean, oh, man.
And it's a culture war, too. Keep that in mind, right? I mean, look at what they're pushing. I mean, the Azov Battalion in particular, they are a bunch of neo-pagan fire worshippers. They're not Christians.
yes, they are. Yeah, but
I don't know. I think they're idiots. They're Slavs who think they're Aryans, and I can't think of anyone on earth dumber than that. That is pretty dumb.
And it's
the Nazis despise Slavs, and they're these Slavs who think they're Aryans.
What's really galling is that the PR, there's that transgender reporter, right? He or she works at the Daily Beast and claimed to be a member of the AFU when he went to the front lines, and now he went back to America. He's doing tours in Arizona. Cirillo, that's the person.
She wanted me dead. She called for my death. And she was like all excited because she thought that she had met the guy who had murdered me. That was surreal.
It's a disgusting human being. If you could even call him that, whatever. And this is a symptom of this entire system. Or Alex said it's a bubble, and this is a symptom of it.
He's on Twitter. He's going on about how Russians are anti-Christian and how the Ukrainians are pro-Christian and they're fighting against anti-Christians. And I'm like,
and didn't the Ukrainians just ban the Orthodox Church?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they claimed that it had ties to the Kremlin. Well, obviously. I mean, it's the Orthodox Church of Russia. So Of course, it's going to have ties to the Kremlin. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean they're spies. And they're preventing people from praying. There's so many videos of elderly grandmothers weeping for their children who have died, and they can't even bury them because they won't allow them to hold a procession. It's insane. This is the democracy that the whole Western world is supposed to defend. Same government that bans the free press and bans opposition political parties. Yeah, totally democratic right there.
Well,
it's a smoke screen.
Kiss. I'm sorry, Brian. I cut you off. Sorry.
Well, I mean, it's very obviously it's all just a smoke screen. I mean, this was always a project for hegemony. It's about money and power, and that's it. That's all it's about. And all of the rest of this is camouflage, because if they were just out in the open doing this, nobody would go along with it. So in order to get people to go along with it, and that's where the culture war comes in. You have to, it's just like branding. You got to figure out a way to sell this poison to the public. If they knew what it really was, they would never buy it. So you use marketing to make it look appealing, and you get people to buy it. That's pretty much the West in a nutshell. And if you look at these big corporations that they just get bigger and bigger just for the sake of getting bigger until they collapse under their own weight. I mean, we've seen many examples of this. Now it's happening for entire nations and for the whole West, unfortunately.
Now look at BlackRock. They have signed an agreement with Zelensky to reconstruct the company, and that's worth tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars even, that is going to be paid for by the American taxpayer and the European taxpayer. And BlackRock gets richer, and no one else gets any money because everybody else gets poorer, because that's what BlackRock does. They buy up property, and they upcharge people. I mean, that's their business, right? They're an asset management firm. And Zelensky has confirmed to be going to the WEF next month to meet with Klaus Schwab. Fun.
Well, I have a question, because I honestly don't know. BlackRock says they're going to reconstruct Ukraine. I mean, how do you even put a proposal like that forward in the middle of a war? I mean, what are they defining as Ukraine? What are they going to reconstruct? I mean, don't you have to have like a list? Yeah, I know it doesn't matter.
There you are, Brian, with your tinfoil hat questions.
It's the money. It's the money that they want. Yeah, it's the money that they want. It's these billions and billions that are getting poured into Ukraine, and someone has to manage it. Yep. Someone has to invest it. Someone has to trade it. Someone has to make interest off of it.
Afghanistan, right? They would build these billion-dollar constructions for like a single building that probably cost them, I don't know, $5 million to make, and they would charge $2 billion for it.
Yeah, and in the end, you don't even really need to build anything, because a lot of this money is just going to leave right out of the back door from Ukraine, and it'll get put in some finance vehicle or some investment fund that BlackRock owns, because they own all of it. Mm-hmm. And it's just going to, make money for them. And everyone involved is going to get their piece of the pie. They're going to get a nice slice of $1 billion here and $1 billion there. And BlackRock is going to make 10, 20%, whatever they make year on year. And that'll be that.
Yeah. Hey, BlackRock, I'm here in Ukraine. Why don't you send some cash my way? Just a couple of million. I'd be
follow the money. Follow the money. That's what BlackRock's doing. They understand what's going on. They understand. They know this is not about whatever territory is left of Ukraine, or if they're going to be able to build a high rise or a business park or anything like that. They're just saying, look, all this money is getting shoveled into Ukraine, and someone's going to have to shovel it out.
FTX
Someone's going to have to make money off of this money, because it's not about buildings. Wall Street is not about building things. This is, we're talking about, the financial services industry. And so they're just going to take this money and multiply it. Mm-hmm. And they're going to pay the cut to everybody that was involved in getting this deal together, including Zelensky. He's going to make a nice cut off of this. That's why he's going to the WEF. And the WEF is going to make money, and Klaus Schwab is going to make money. They're all going to make money. And nothing has changed. This has been going on since 2014, when they got the coup going, and Vice President Joe Biden was named the de facto leader of Ukraine. This has been happening now for 8-9 years. And in the United States, no one talks about Biden and all the many trips he made to Ukraine and all the many meetings he had with the cabinet of the government of Poroshenko, and all the speeches he gave in front of parliament. and the little side hustles that Hunter was involved in, and all of these things. All of this stuff has just been completely memory hold. And all of this is no different than what Obama was doing in Syria either. Just like they were supporting the Azov guys and the right sector and all of these guys, they were doing the same thing in Syria to overthrow Assad. And what did they call them? They called them moderate rebels.
The Free
ISIS
Syrian
guys were
Army.
called, yeah, exactly. They were called the Free Syrian Army, and they were
Yeah, they were
moderate
ISIS.
rebels. Same thing. It's just copy paste. The only difference between Syria and Ukraine, the big difference is that in Syria you couldn't prop up someone like, I don't know who was the guy, Baghdadi. You couldn't turn him into a hero. But
Yeah, because he's
in
a terrorist.
Ukraine, you
They
could
were
take
trying to
Zelensky
find an
and turn
angle.
him into a hero. That's the big difference.
Because
There
they
was a
couldn't be
point where
controlled.
they were
right?
trying
Those guys.
to.
Yeah.
There was a period where they were trying to rehabilitate Al Qaeda there for a while. They were trying
Yeah,
to
true.
rehabilitate
Yeah.
them
Very true.
and put them right back to where they were in the 80s, freedom fighters. But Ian, you
get
talked
a
about
Rambo 3 movie going. With
yeah. Ian, you talked about Afghanistan. I used to look at the Inspector General reports, which are really boring. But you read through all of the money, the billions and billions that go there, and them trying to account for all of it. And you look at all these projects and you think, well, if they actually went through with these projects, they would have transformed Afghanistan to like the 51st state of the United States. I mean, all of these things that they were supposed to be building, but the contractors, all they wanted was their money and to go home and spend it. They didn't care if it got finished. They just did the bare minimum to collect their money and go home. They didn't care what happened to Afghanistan. The exact same thing's going on in Ukraine. So you're fighting a war that you want to win, but you just can't get your act together enough to actually win it. This is their problem in Afghanistan. And it looks like that's what their problem is with Ukraine. So it's completely insane.
It's strange,
and to think that there's people dying for this is unbelievable.
It's strange. I mean, you compare it to what Russia is doing in Mariupol, and they have rebuilt that city. That's how it. Like they actually rebuilt it. You can go there. You can look at it. There's a lot of videos on this. There's tours, live streams and so on. So the Russians really are rebuilding the place, whereas the Ukrainians, they don't seem to be doing much with all that money that they're getting.
No, I mean, like
they're doing something with it.
Oh yeah,
the Mariupol stuff is. And by the way, Zelensky's wife went on begged for money in France and then went on a 50,000 euro shopping spree. Jesus Christ, despicable. But Mariupol, it's not Russian propaganda. There are all kinds of people who have shown so much video. It's unfakeable at this point. It's really happening. They are really rebuilding it. But Zelensky and his whole crew, God alone knows how much money they've siphoned off. I mean, if you told me that Zelensky at this point has a couple of billion stashed away, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. On top of the billion that he had before the war, I mean, unbelievable. Yeah, but there's no way to change this. This is the thing I keep coming back to, because I honestly do not see a political leadership class arising in the West that could replace this corrupt pseudo technocracy, because they all claim to be experts on all sorts of fucking things, but they don't know a goddamn thing about anything. I mean, they are truly ignorant. And most especially ignorant about the things that they are messing with in ways that have unintended and catastrophic consequences. That's the thing that bothers me the most. There does not seem to be any leadership class that's sort of like in the bullpen, ready to come out onto the field. You know what I mean? I mean, Ian, we were talking about this before you came on. Do you see any such leadership class?
No, they don't have one. It's non-existent. I mean, if one exists, it's probably being suppressed, right? Because it's not like they're going to allow any sort of competition, because you give people competition and the public might choose someone who's not you.
Well, look at Elon Musk, for example. I mean, he gets these contracts between SpaceX and the government and all kinds of things. And now he's doing Starlink in Ukraine. But anytime that he so much as rocks the boat a little bit, they threaten him with investigations, with this and with that. And that's what they do. The carrot and stick thing isn't just what they do in foreign policy overseas. It's what they do internally also. Everyone, there's the incentive, and then there's the punishment if you don't take the incentive and go along with the program. And so I think, yeah, that's what happens. The people who could potentially be creating alternatives in the West, I think they either leave the West and go east and work for companies over there, alternative examples of these corrupt monopolies in the West, or they end up suppressed or bought off or flipped in the West. I don't know. What does everyone else think about that?
I think that makes sense.
Yeah,
I
I know people who are going to Moscow. I know people who are going to Istanbul. That seems to be where a lot of very energetic and very clever people are moving to because they don't really see a future in the West. And there doesn't seem to be a place where you can be free to speak your mind and just do stuff. I mean, it's remarkable to realize that Russia today is a lot more free than the West. You can say things, you can disagree with how the SMO is being conducted, you can disagree on a whole host of issues. You cannot do that in the West. If you say that it's a bad idea to be funding Ukraine, instantly. I mean, you don't clap loud enough, like a seal in Congress for Zelensky, they come after you full bore.
Look at what they did to Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? I mean, they are smearing her. They're smearing that guy from Florida, Matt Gaetz. They hit him with all these bogus claims that he solicited prostitutes. There's no evidence of any of this, but that's what they do, right? To diminish a person's reputation.
It's the money and the power. There's a lot of money and power involved. And you have all these people who are sitting in Congress or in the EU Parliament or wherever they are. And, it's a good gig and they don't want to lose it. And they're making a lot of money from all of it. And they've got a lot of power and they've got a lot of privilege.
You even see this on the rank and file levels, like the lower levels of employment, like in the UK, if you're, let's say you're a veteran military pilot, there's a good chance that you can't get a job anymore because you happen to be white and male. So many of them, and I read about this recently, actually wrote about it, have been getting jobs with China, training their pilots. And these are veteran pilots, some of the best in the world. And they're working for China now because China is willing to pay them something like, $240,000 a year. These are salaries they just can't get in the West because the West is all about the diversity, equity, and inclusivity, which just means that you can't be a white male or even an Asian male these days. And so a lot of people who, there's this brain drain that's going on that no one is really talking about.
Maybe it will help accelerate it. I mean, I think that's the best case scenario is that it ends quickly. The quicker it ends. I don't know. I'm divided whether it ends quickly, short and simple, or it kind of drags out and slowly, you don't want to see it collapse and everyone suffer, ordinary people suffer from a collapse. So if it's stretched out over a long enough period, there could be sort of an orderly or semi-orderly transition. But like everyone is pointing out here, there really doesn't seem to be a viable alternative, at least not an obvious one.
Yeah. I mean, thankfully there's, wild cards do exist, right? Like Elon Musk, his purchase of Twitter has emboldened a lot of people, especially on the right or the center, the heterodox center, to start speaking out. And they've come to realize there's a lot more of us than there are of these woke mob members. And that's a really good thing because a lot of other tech CEOs, including Zuckerberg, are looking at what Elon is doing and they're keeping a close eye on it because they're like, okay, he has gotten rid of political censorship, so maybe we should do the same. And that's an interesting development.
I wouldn't count much on Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg's position is extraordinarily fragile right now. It's a miracle that he's still CEO of Facebook or Meta. I was actually in touch with a couple of friends in the consulting and the corporate world, and they were telling me that people are incredibly pissed off at Zuckerberg, especially because he missed the boat insofar as providing services like
AWS and cloud.
Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of people are saying, and this meta thing that people find laughable, and it's not, there is no obvious way that they're going to make money off of this nonsense, and so a lot of people in the corporate world, maybe, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, right now, it's like it's garbage. There's like 50 users online, literally 50 users online on their Horizon Worlds app. No one uses
Dude.
it. Nobody wants to put on a headset and spend 8 hours inside of virtual reality in some sort of glorified chat room. It's stupid.
Give them some time, Ian, to destroy actual reality, and then you will be jumping headfirst into Meta.
Yeah, we're all going to live in Ready Player One kind of thing. I mean, yeah. But I can tell you that the loss of 75% of the price of the stock in the last couple of years, it has freaked out a lot of people who are very, very powerful. And by the way, parenthetically, just a note, we're up to 5,100 viewers, concurrent viewers. Thank you so much, chat. And as usual, to everybody, please share the link and have more people hop on, because it's been so much fun. Yeah. I mean, like, Ian, you're really into tech and into social media, and so do you see any possibility that Meta would ever be anything that people would really go for? That it could ever be like a new TikTok, the new next thing?
No. I mean, not without some severe revamps. And I think a big problem with Meta is they kind of killed their golden goose before now, right? I mean, the thing that Zuckerberg did before instituting this whole metaverse nonsense was to kill the publication arm. Before, Meta was the number one driver of traffic to news websites, news publications, and so on. And he killed that because he was like, I don't know, he went to some yoga class and he decided that news was bad for people's mindsets. It was hurting their psyche. People don't want to read bad news. And so he started removing all of that from the algorithm. So people just stopped going to Facebook to get their news feeds. Instead, now they're going to Twitter for their news because it's uncensored news. And it's a good thing too, because Elon wants to capitalize on this, and Elon has this idea, this dream, I guess, to kill the news media, to make it so that citizen journalism replaces the news, right? No more establishment media. I think it's fantastic. And I mean, a year from now, we could be streaming this roundtable here on Twitter, because he's building that stuff right now, right? He's building live streaming functions. Like, he's going to expand on Spaces, and Spaces have been great. Like, I've been, hosting some really, really massive Spaces that he himself joined, a couple of times. So,
hey, when you send him a link and see if he wants to hop on the broadcast, feel free.
Hey, Ian, you said last time you were going to get him on.
Yeah,
What
come on, live up to your word.
I don't like bugging the guy. I don't like bugging the guy.
Well, at least get him to uncensor me, unban me.
I'll try. Yeah.
80,000 subscribers.
Did manage to get him to unban Carpe Donktum recently, so that was cool. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so he's back.
Look at Meta, though. Look at what Facebook was before they switched to Meta, which to be honest, I didn't really look that much into it because it didn't really seem like it was something that was going to work out well. But just look what happened. I know people in Thailand were trying to do business on it. Like, they had a retail store and they were using Facebook as part of that. And Facebook was just crushing businesses. Like, they would change the rules suddenly. So you built up all of this rapport with your customers through Facebook, and now suddenly you can't do business. So who's going to want to go on Meta or whatever the heck this thing was that they were going to roll out? If you invest your time, your energy, your money into this, and then they change the rules on a whim, and then everything is out the window, and then what are you supposed to do? So I mean, Facebook, do people trust it? Would they trust it to invest in it the way they had been before? I don't know. And this is what happens to these social media platforms. They get out of control, and then people move on to the next thing. I mean, you got to keep the alternatives going. You need to keep encouraging and investing in alternatives.
I think the big problem with Facebook, I mean, in contrast to Twitter, a lot of people are criticizing Elon Musk because he's kind of mercurial. He's shooting from the hip, so to speak, right? I mean, he's breaking things fast and breaking things and failing fast, right? That's his philosophy, to innovate really, really quickly, and it's worked so far for him on SpaceX and then Tesla and so on, like the self-driving beta and so on. And with Twitter, he's doing the same thing. And people criticize him. They're like, well, it's an unstable platform. Who wants to use it? But there's a difference, right, between someone like Elon Musk and somebody like Zuckerberg. When Zuckerberg changes the rules, you can't complain about it. There's no one to complain to, right? It's all algorithmically driven. If you're banned on Facebook, good luck getting your account reinstated, because it's going to be a robot that you're talking to. You're not going to be talking to a real person. Whereas with Twitter, I mean, if you have a complaint, just tell Elon about it. right? I mean, that seems to work because he does respond to people. I mean, he made some questionable decisions a few weeks ago when he instituted a ban on Linktree, right, and on Instagram, because he didn't feel like people shouldn't be using Twitter as a platform, as a space to spam. Right, there are other websites, and I think that's a fair thing, but it was very poorly worded. It's not his fault. It's, I guess, his team's fault, really. If you look at what he said versus the rules that were written, they're different. But he saw that people were upset by it, and so he undid the rule, right, immediately. And now no one is even talking about that mistake that he made because he undid it. And with Facebook, on the other hand, if they make a mistake, it's there for forever, right, for good. Like the mistake they made with Meta, or the mistake they made with publications, with limiting the reach of publishers, that hasn't been undone. That's been in place for 3 years. I mean, if you compare the traffic you used to get from Facebook, if you link to an offsite link before, you could maybe pay a couple $100 and get tens of thousands of views. Now, good luck. Good luck getting even 100. So why would anyone want to do their business on Facebook when they are unwilling to even admit that they've made a mistake? It's such a bureaucracy there. It's too big. I mean, when they were talking about layoffs earlier this year, it was something like, 12, 15,000 people fired. And it's like, that's a lot of fucking people. Holy shit. That's an insane number of people.
Another thing with Facebook and also Twitter and Google, they were working with the government. They were making horrible policy decisions and ruining the platform because it was all part of the establishment exercising control and keeping everybody down. But multipolarism is about everybody, the playing field leveling, creating alternatives, and unipolarism is about squashing alternatives, squashing competition, maintaining the monopoly. And that's what they were using Twitter and Facebook and Google for, and they still are to a certain extent. That's what they were doing. So, a lot of these horrible decisions you see these companies make, it's not because it's going to make them a better company. It's because it serves the monopoly. It serves unipolarism.
Yeah, thanks to the Twitter files, we now know this to be a fact. It's no longer a conspiracy theory. Before people would have, they'd be like, there's no way the government's talking to them. That's a conspiracy theory. Turns out it's real. The emails.
I was telling people about this for years. And like, Brian, where's your tinfoil hat? And now it is. It was it's obvious. Even the Western media was reporting on it. It's buried in their articles, but it's all there. So you know. People don't want to believe that it's true.
It's funny if you look at the emails, like the most recent Twitter files drop, it showed that the government was collaborating not just with Twitter, but with Facebook, with Google, with even what is it? Verizon Media, right? Verizon controls Yahoo, so that's like a journalistic website. What are they doing talking to journalists? Telling journalists what to put out? That's fascinating.
I love the fact that they were paying Twitter $3 million a year. Was it? To keep the grip
3.5,
going.
Great.
Facebook and Twitter deleted my accounts on the exact same day, and Facebook openly admitted that there was an investigation. Twitter never made any statement at all, but it was all done on the exact same day. So they're obviously they're talking to each other, or
No, they're all friends. Anyone that spends time in Silicon Valley, you understand Silicon Valley is just, what is it?
Very small.
15 kilometers of just the same people.
Place.
It's the VCs. It's the tech companies. They're all a bike ride away. You go to Google, you can go to Yahoo, you can visit all the VCs, all the big venture capital, Sequoia, and all of these guys. And the one guys fund the other guys, and they take employees from one company and they move them to another company, and then they sit as advisors on the VC boards. It's all the same people. So when someone on Twitter, when it gets banned, the word is out there, and in 5 minutes, they're calling up Facebook and they're saying, hey, Brian, let's shut down this guy. Okay, I'll shut him down too. They're hanging out together. They're going for beers after work or whatever they do. And, it's just one group of people, 5, 10, 20,000 people that are hanging out with each other. So, the fact that one person gets censored on one platform and then, everyone is censoring that person is, to me, it makes perfect sense, because
it's not just
everything was centralized. Yeah, that one area concentrated.
It's San Francisco,
in that one
right?
area.
the San Francisco FBI office run by Elvis Chan, right? He's the supervisor there. And he was sending out these emails to all these companies with the same list. So that's why people are getting censored at the same time, right? That's very obvious now. We know this now. Before, we didn't have names or anything, but thanks to the work of Attorney General Eric Schmidt of Missouri and his lawsuit, we know Elvis Chan is a big player in all of this. Now, obviously, Elvis is taking his orders from somebody else, right? He's not like the guy in charge. He's taking orders from some guy at DC. And they've got this whole Excel sheet. I mean, this is shown in the latest Twitter files, an Excel sheet of thousands of names. So they would just give it to all these companies that have your Twitter handle, your Facebook handle, your Reddit handle, your Instagram handle, all in one nice little package. And, it would be up to the moderators to decide if they want to ban you. But of course they would. I mean, the FBI tells you to do something, you're going to do it, right? You're not going to fight it. Because, for obvious reasons. And that was the pressure they were under. And they went along with it. Whether or not they protested doesn't really matter because they went along with it anyway. So, when you got banned on, say, Facebook or something, you were also banned on Twitter at the same time because they're on that same list. And they didn't even check these names one at a time. Before, at the start, you can see this in the email chain. At the start, they're very reticent about banning people because they're like, well, we can't actually find a violation of this. But then the FBI analyst puts out some list and says, oh, these are all Russian bots. That's confirmed. It's like, they don't even check. They just ban everybody on the list. And, you're going to get thousands of false positives, right? Yeah. Of 10,000 names, 9,000 of them are false positives. Actually, maybe more like 9,950 are false positives.
That's why the whole Russian thing is so perfect for them. Because whoever they don't want, they can just call them a Putin this or a Russian that.
Yep.
And it works out perfectly. Hillary Clinton, she knew. Her team knew what they were doing in 2016 when they threw out the whole Russia thing.
Yeah,
they knew exactly what they were doing when they were saying, okay, let's try to find that enemy that everyone has been conditioned to hate, that we can just throw out there, and it can cover a plethora of anything that goes against us. Just whatever doesn't go our way, we can just call them this. What is it? Russia, Putin. There you go.
Yeah, something
Robbie
else,
Mook
Alex,
and all these guys, they figured it out. They said it's Russia. That's what we can do, and that'll cover everything.
Yeah.
Whatever goes wrong, whatever goes against the narrative, just label it Russia or Putin, and it covers everything, and it works.
Yeah,
it works.
And the thing that I noticed, Alex, is that back in 2012, I don't know if you guys remember Mitt Romney when he was running for president, because he ran in 12. Yeah, he did. And so when he was running, at some speech he gave, he said something about Russia, that Russia, oh, my friends, Russia is still something to worry about. And at the time I thought, what the hell are you talking about? Russia is just minding its own business, living its life. But clearly the notion of Russia was on the back burner even back then, 10 years ago. So clearly, I mean, if Romney would have said that on the campaign trail, then clearly it was something that was on the back burner, something that eventually is going to be on the front burner.
It's funny, the Democrats laughed at him when he said it. They laughed at him.
Obama called him out, actually. But you see, this is the thing about the whole demonizing of Russia, is that the West, Europe and the US, they have been conditioned, from conservatives to liberals to progressives. It doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum. They've been conditioned, the people and the political class and the media, they've been conditioned to hate Russians.
Yeah.
Through cinema, media, all the films,
books.
They've been conditioned to hate Russia. And that has played a huge role in the death and the destruction and the escalation that we've seen in Ukraine. Because you can see a lot of the bad decisions that all of these elites and these prime ministers and these parliament members are making, a lot of it is driven by hate. There's money, there's power, and there's hate, because deep inside, they really do have an animosity towards Russia and the Russian people. And they've said it, and it's come out, and it's served Putin and the Kremlin really well, because what they've been able to do is they've said, you see, we told you that they hate us. We told you. And here they are saying it. Here's Lindsey Graham saying it, that I want to assassinate Putin. Here's, they come out and they make fun of us, and then they demonize us, and they cancel our music and our composers and our artists and our athletes and our Paralympians. They cancel people Yeah.
Oh,
People.
come on, man. That's cruel. That's just cruel.
It's nasty, yeah. Like these people train for 4 years,
It's
and
gross. Yeah.
and they're like, oh
And
yeah,
so
no,
for
you
a
can't
country
participate
like
in
the
Russia.
United States, which is so obsessed with racism, no one ever sits there and says, that's well and good. You're okay, racism, and you guys, obviously that's very high up on the priorities of Americans, but the hatred that they have for Russians and the Russian culture and the Russian people is off the freaking charts. And this hatred is taking us towards a very dangerous place. And they're driven by that hatred.
Yep.
That's why they're doing a lot of the things they're doing. That's why they're putting an oil price cap and a gas price cap. When people are telling them, don't do it, it doesn't make any freaking sense.
You know what's weird?
that they
The
want-
feeling is not mutual in Russia, right? Russians don't hate the West. They don't hate America. They just don't. Like they're confused. It's, what the hell's happening? Like when you watch Russians depicted in movies, it's always some pro-Soviet Union ultra nationalists. Like most recently in the latest season of Jack Ryan, they hate the West. It's like these are non-existent Russians. They don't exist in real life. Like there's no Russian who thinks like that.
Yeah.
None.
That's why the first thing they did, Ian, the first thing that the EU did when this conflict broke out is they cut off the media. They canceled Russian media in Europe. And what else did they do? They cut off the travel.
Yeah. So you can't even go
because
there
they
and
don't want
check it out.
people to interact. That's why the UK went crazy when Russia was hosting the World Cup in 2018, because the last thing that the UK elite wanted to see was English football fans who love their football traveling to Russia and actually realizing that, you know what? These
They're
people
just like
are
us.
actually cool. Yeah, they're just like us. They love their football like us. And we can watch a match and drink a pint and we get along. And that's exactly what happened. But the UK was lobbying really hard to demonize Russia during the World Cup. And they did the same thing for Sochi. And it's this is how they operate. They don't want people to interact. They don't want the people to realize that, you know what? Everything that we've been conditioned about these people is just not true.
Well,
it's not true at all.
I think that what they really want is that they don't want to allow any viable alternative to appear on the scene. They want it to be, Kentucky Fried Chickens and big box stores and everything like the American hellscape, American suburban hellscape. They don't want people to see a culture, an approach to life, a political approach to things that deviates from the narrative. I think that's an issue. That's a key issue. Because it's not so much the Russian people per se. They don't want to allow any alternative, because any alternative, you automatically start comparing. And you're saying, oh, yeah, the Russians that have this, that sucks, and that sucks. But this other thing, this is pretty good. Why don't we apply it here in our country? And that's what they don't want. That's what they want to avoid, it seems to me. And by the way, going back to your issue, Alex, of like the hatred for Russians, and the fact that in the West, it's constant anti-racism, tolerance, and all the rest of it. I think that basically it became kind of like the 2 minutes of hate kind of thing of 1984. Like, these are the only people you can hate. You can't hate, the gays. You can't hate the transgenders. You can't hate any racial group that's different from yours. But you can hate these guys. So channel all of that intolerance that you might have, or the fact that you don't like certain groups because you think that they're pernicious for children or what have you. Channel it to the Russians. I mean, that seems to be what's going on.
And Asia.
And the Chinese and Asians. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
I noticed that a lot.
Yeah.
In the Western media, there's a lot of that where they make these really nasty jokes about Asia that you could never make about any of these other groups that are protected in the West. But they encourage hatred toward Russia and China. They also encourage hatred among people within the West. They want everyone hating each other, suspicious of each other. And again, it's to keep people from getting together, seeing any sort of common ground, to build anything of substance on. And it's, again, when you're talking about competition and unipolarism and domination, you do not want groups of people getting together and building something on their own. You want them to be isolated, cut off from everyone else. it's just like on the battlefield, you have a group of soldiers that are cut off. They're dead. They're done.
Yeah.
There's nothing they can do. They can't get more ammunition.
This
They
is
can't
what they did with
communicate.
the anti-vaxxers or the anti-masking people. Anyone who was opposed to lockdowns, who was critical of lockdowns, who even spoke out against it. I mean, Harvard doctors, Stanford doctors were canceled because they spoke out against lockdowns. They said lockdowns would kill people. It would cause more harm than good. So they canceled them, right? The media called them hacks, called them conspiracy theorists. And 2 years later, it turns out they're right. They're correct. They were right all along. Lockdowns were bad. Guess
But,
which country did
Ian-
do lockdowns? Russia and Belarus.
Yeah. And Ian, did you see that despicable article in the Atlantic calling for a COVID amnesty?
I saw that. Yeah, that was garbage.
Oh, God, that pissed me
F
off
that
so
piece.
much.
Yeah,
For those of you in
amnesty.
chat who don't know, it was basically an article in the Atlantic Monthly saying that all the vitriol and all the cancellations of various people during COVID, we should just declare an amnesty. Basically written by someone and published in an organization that was virulent about canceling people who deviated from the narrative insofar as to how to treat COVID. But now that the pernicious effects of the lockdowns and now the medication is becoming apparent, all of a sudden they want to declare an amnesty and like, oh, truth and reconciliation. But of course, there's no reconciliation because, of course, the people who push the bullshit, none of them are being punished. And I think I want to turn the conversation in that direction. Nobody gets punished ever. They can screw up catastrophically. Okay, Brian, you're there. They can screw up catastrophically and they walk away. That's the thing that
They get richer. Yeah. They get jobs at places like Pfizer. Wow, imagine that. Like being a cheerleader for this big company, and 2 years later you work for it. Nice, cool.
Yeah, that's how it works, and then they can convince the public that these corporations are not only good, but they're necessary. They're essential.
Yeah,
they're too big, not only to fail, too big to question. Too big to live without. It's and when you have something that is unchecked like that, it becomes abusive and it becomes dangerous, and then it gets to a point where it collapses under its own weight. And we were just talking about Afghanistan and Ukraine. All of this is going to collapse under its own weight, especially when you have other countries out there with alternatives who are determined. Garland was talking about that 2023 will be the year where maybe multipolarism achieves escape velocity away from unipolarism. So
I think that's definitely in the cards, considering Saudi Arabia is pivoting so decisively towards China. I think that is actually
and Russia.
Move. Yeah, I mean, Russia and China and India, they are separate poles, right? But the fact that the key nation for the Americans, which is Saudi Arabia, I mean, that really is the key nation for them because of not just the oil supply, but the fact that they're on the dollar system. The fact that the Saudis are pivoting away, and MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the current de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, recognizes that the United States is in the rearview mirror and China and Russia are in the future, and how he's decisively pivoting in those two directions. That I think is the key issue, because we were talking before about the big events of 2022. Certainly the SMO was a big event, obviously no question, but I think that the truly big event insofar as the fate of the United States is concerned is Saudi Arabia's pivot. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I mean, the petrodollar is, the only reason America even has the ability to print money is because it's on the petrodollar. The world depends on it. It's the foremost trading currency. And now with so many countries moving away from it, you have ASEAN, which is trying to develop its own currency with China, right? Its own trading system, maybe not its own currency, but they're going to trade internally using their own money. And you see India and Russia trading with each other using rubles and the Indian currency. Like, they are not depending on the US dollar anymore, right? The US dollar is as you said, it's in the rearview mirror. And what I see happening now is that they're going to get desperate. The Biden administration or whoever else is next, if it's Democrats, particularly if it's Democrats, they're going to get really desperate, and they're going to probably try to stage a color revolution in Saudi Arabia. They'll say that Mohammed bin Salman is a dictator, is a despot, and he's literally oppressing the gays or something, right? That's what they're going to go for.
I used to say years ago that they would do that they've got this whole dossier on everything that's been going on in Saudi Arabia for the last couple of decades. You know, you never hear Human Rights Watch or Amnesty, these fake human rights organizations, say anything at all about Saudi Arabia. But you know, they have a file stacked from the floor up to the ceiling about everything going on, and they'll have all kinds of things that they'll try to stir up. But again, like Garland said, everyone's catching on to color revolution. Everyone at least is aware of how it works. Maybe they don't have the things in position to
in Venezuela
counteract it. Yeah,
right. They tried it in Venezuela and it failed. Right, they tried to overthrow Maduro.
Venezuela, Kazakhstan, Belarus. I mean, all over the place. And
right in Belarus in particular, right? They tried to overthrow the guy, even though he was, lawfully elected. People love the guy. He might be a thug. I mean,
I don't know if he was loved, right? But
they respect him, right? He's a strong man. He is serving the interests of the Belarusian people, and you got to respect that, right? No matter what his politics are.
But also, what he was ultimately doing, he was playing both sides off the middle, which a smaller country squeezed between two big powers, the EU and Russia. You have to, and everybody was fine with that. I mean, sometimes they weren't particularly happy when the guy went the other way, but I mean, it's understandable. But instead of that, they did the color revolution and decisively pushed him in the wrong direction, as so far as they're concerned. I mean, they didn't. That's
they did the same thing with Assad, right? They tried to do the same thing with Assad, right? Before he was very pro-Western. He was, I mean, he was on like the cover of Time magazine.
He was an ophthalmologist. He was an ophthalmologist in London, for crying out loud. I mean, come on.
There's a lot to like about him.
The problem
he was having dinner with the Careys.
Right. I mean,
he was
praised.
The problem is unless you are 100% subservient, subordinated to the West, it's never good enough. So you could be playing both sides, and from the West's point of view, it would make the most sense to take advantage. Okay, they're playing both sides. Let's get what we can from them when they want to play on our side. But they cannot do that. They have to have total control. This is the fundamental flaw of unipolarism.
Exactly. The globalists, the EU, for example, it demands 100%. 100% compliance, not 99%, not 95%. They want 100%. If you deviate even 1%, you're out. Take a look at the Chancellor of Austria, Kurz. I remember he, young guy, very much part of the elite class, but he would deviate a little bit from what the ruling elites in Brussels wanted. Maybe 5% deviation.
A little bit. That was too much.
They got rid of him. They demand 100%. And going back to Saudi Arabia, the big story of the year was the SMO, because without the SMO, you would not have had Saudi Arabia.
Oh, yeah.
Period. And MBS, the whole family, they're in lockstep. They're all making the decision as the royal family. They understand the risks that they're taking, and they're going to make sure that they execute this change without having the United States go after them. They're all on. They're making the decision together. And you saw when Xi Jinping went to Riyadh to visit MBS, to visit the royal family. You saw who greeted him. Everyone is on the same page there, and the U.S. is going to try to get rid of MBS, but I think they're going to have a really, really hard time doing it. But there's no doubt about it. The event that changed everything was the SMO. Without the SMO, you would not have gotten all of this hysteria, which led to the seizing of assets, to the kicking off of SWIFT, to the oil price caps, to all of these things, which has left 80% of the world to just sit back and say, geez, my money is not safe in the United States or Canada. My yacht is not safe parked in this country. In
and what's funny? The funny thing is when they sanctioned all those yachts and the wealth of those Russian businessmen. I'm not going to call them oligarchs just because they're Westerners, right? I mean, oligarch is a slur. Let's be fair. If you are a Western warmonger, then you're not an oligarch. You're an entrepreneur, right? But if you're Russian and you're doing any kind of business, you're any kind of successful, you're an oligarch. Doesn't
You're
matter if you made your
automatically
money
an oligarch.
legitimately, right? And these guys are pro-Western. They live in Western countries.
Yes.
They're pro-Western,
Yes.
and they had their money seized. So guess what? They went back running to Putin. They're like, you know what? You were right all along. These guys are assholes.
Yeah. And
Please
by the
take
way,
us back. And he's like, sure.
well, I don't know if it was that easy, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. I just want to welcome my two guests who've come on at the same time. Thanks, guys. It's Larry Johnson. Larry, it's such a pleasure to see you again. How's it going?
Good.
Good to see you. And we've got Alex of History Legends. Alex, my man, how's it going?
I'm good. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, my pleasure. Larry, just do keep in mind that you've got like some speaker in the background that is coming on the thing.
Is that?
But anyway, it's better. So, we were talking about the Russian oligarchs or the.
Oh, I've been watching, monitoring. So I was just that we're going from as we discussed today, Pax Americana to Pax Americana, where the sickness of America is infecting the world. The behavior of America is a little bit like a pedophile grooming children. We're your best buddy. We're buying you chocolate. We'll give you all this aid, and then next thing you know, they're trying to kill you, and we're trying to kill you, overthrow you, get rid of you. I mean, it's sick. It's perverse. I'm more disgusted with it with each passing day.
Okay, what has pissed you off lately, to tell you? Because you seem more because we just talked a couple of days ago, and it was a delight as always. But
that was a really good episode. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. That was a really, really great episode. Just have to say, the last one that you did.
Yeah, it was fantastic. But why do you feel? What has happened in the last couple of days that really? I mean, you seem pissed off now. What happened?
Yeah, if you're sitting here in America listening to what's going on the media, it is completely divorced from reality, and it is the insistence that, boy, Russia's on the ropes. Ukraine is marching forward. Ukraine is gaining territory. We just don't know how long Putin's going to hang on. And I'm listening to this, going, what alternate universe are you guys in? I mean, maybe it's a sign that drug use in the United States is pervasive. That everybody's doing hallucinogens or mushrooms or something. But it is crazy. And when you try to reason with these people, particularly the Jewish Americans, that's the one that it just completely baffles me, because I have several friends who had parents that died in the Holocaust or that were Holocaust survivors. And here they're backing and embracing a Nazi. Well, he's Jewish. Yeah. So, I mean, it is just, so this, it's building up. I'm a cranky old man. What can I tell you?
Well, let me turn the microphone over to a cranky young man, Alex of History Legends. How do you see this all playing out in the West? I mean, what are your thoughts? And by the way, what do you think was the big news of the whole year, as far as you're concerned? Apart, obviously, from the SMO, what specific thing is like most on your mind?
Well, I wanted to mention there was this article on the BBC talking about what could happen in 2023 in terms of the war in Ukraine. And all these people, all these so-called experts are out of their mind. I don't know. I don't understand. Even the most pro-Russian article, pro-Russian, says that the Ukrainians will capture Crimea by spring 2023. And they don't say how, they don't explain. There's just, this is going to happen. And this goes into what Larry was saying, is that some people are just completely crazy and not on earth. They're not in reality anymore. So I just think that the latest military developments just don't show this happening. I don't see it in terms of underground stuff. We see another wave of missiles more than ever. We're all these experts saying, oh, Russia is running out of missiles. One of my friends said, all these so-called experts, you should unfollow them. Anyone who said, yeah, Russia is running out of missiles. Garbage. This is no analysis. This is just repeating, recycling propaganda news. And I'm like, this is a bad job at analysis. I'm just disappointed at the mainstream media, but it's just another layer of disappointment.
Can I jump in before I go real quick?
Sure.
Going off of what Alex said, great to see you, Larry. Great to see you, Alex. But going off of the running out of weapons, this is going to be my final thought, and I'm going to jump off. On the Telegram channel for the Russian Ministry of Defense, they put up a photo of a missile launching, and in Russian it says "Kalibre nie zakonчится nikogda." It will never run out. The Kalibre missile will never run out. This is on the official Russian Ministry of Defense Telegram channel.
They fired 120 of them today.
Yeah,
that's how many. They have
but Ukraine stopped 130. Ukraine stopped 130.
With their infrastructure, right? And then 90% of Lviv doesn't have electricity now because
Ukraine has a 110% interception rate. 110%.
Yeah. And one of those intercepts fell on Belarus today. So that is interesting.
Yes.
Actually, today I can report on the ground that there was there was some multiple strikes. At 9 sharp, they hit the city, and then again at 2 p.m. local times, and they were definitely doing some monkey stuff here in Kharkov. I don't even know about the rest of the country because I didn't have the opportunity to catch up on the news in the rest of the country before the show. But I didn't need to catch up. I saw it, So it's pretty something.
All right, guys, I'm going to jump off. Alex, Larry, Ian, Brian.
Before you go,
my pleasure.
Give Alex Christoforou a +1 before he departs. Thank you so much, Alex. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you to the moderators as well. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
I just checked the BBC article Alex was talking about, and it says Ukraine will win by restoring. Maybe. Hold on, let me see if I can.
It's hilarious. They'll win by taking over Crimea.
Some bullshit. Okay. Okay.
The article is
right
not
here.
good. It's not good.
Political scientist and analyst based in Washington, D.C., Andrei Plonkovsky. All right.
Okay. Ukraine will win by restoring completely. And by spring 2023. And this is the reason why. This is their analysis. Because they have this determination and courage.
The spirit.
Determination and courage, the thing that Russia lacks, right? Yeah.
And the West is completely against Putin. They recognize him as a dictator. So you add that together, Ukraine wins by spring 2023.
And Brian, the worst is that at one point in the article, I made a video about it with a friend. It's going to be up soon. At one point, they said Russia will launch a spring offensive. That's one of the experts said, a spring offensive. I'm like, what do you mean the Russians will launch an attack in the mud? When it's all muddy and rainy, this is when Russia is going to attack? And you're an analyst, a specialist, an
Michael
expert.
Clark.
Oh my God.
Well, it's Michael
Who
Clark.
launches an attack in spring in the middle of mud? Doesn't even make sense.
Nope.
Well, it doesn't have to make sense. It just has to sound like a plausible lie. Alex, aren't you with the program already? Get with it. The narrative is just lies to keep on with the money spigot. That's what it's all about. Or am I wrong?
And
anybody?
Huh? And I mean the thing is they repeat these ridiculous lies over and over again, and then you will see analysts incorporating these blatant lies into their analysis. So they're talking about Russian defenses, and they say, well, they're great defenses. I mean, the New York Times showed these satellite images of just miles and miles of these defensive fortifications that Russia has built, like just miles of trenches, tank traps, and all kinds of things. But they're like, but they're not going to be properly manned because this mobilization, it's all fresh recruits, when over and over again, it has been proven that these are all reservists that have previous training. They previously served in the Russian military. They have a military background, maybe not combat experience. They have military background,
and so on.
Yeah, and so they're going to be manning these defenses, and so they will be properly meant. And so when analysts are trying to explain, and this goes back to the roundtable with Larry and John, with you, Gonzalo, talking about how intelligence no longer informs political decisions. It's driving political decision, has become political in and of itself.
Yeah.
And
and
it's just
it's not
disconnected
just
from reality.
And it's not just that, it's that instead of saying, yeah, 300,000 extra Russian troops will have an impact, they always play it down by saying exactly what you said. Yeah, they're conscripts. No, they're not. Oh, they don't have training. Okay, but they just spent 3 months training with guys that just with combat experience. What we forget is that all these men that were trained, all these mobilized personnel, who were they trained by? They were trained by guys that spent 8 months in Ukraine. I saw reports that say that it's actually former soldiers from the Russian army that fought for months in Ukraine that trained the mobilized personnel and told them all the little tricks to survive and how not to die. So it's legit guys with combat experience.
Yep.
It's not some boot camp with guys that don't know what they're talking about. It's not some special forces guys. It's simple guys that said, okay, if you hear this sound, this is a shell that might kill you. Go down.
No, I mean, ultimately,
And look up. Always look up.
It's these little tricks that determine success or failure in such a situation. And you're absolutely right. I hadn't actually thought of it. I mean, where did you hear this, Alex? I'm really curious about this.
Well, when you have an Instagram page and you have a YouTube page, you get people that tell you stuff, right? And on both sides, right?
Yeah.
And one thing also that happens is that one important aspect for these Russian mobilized personnel is how to carry first aid. So once someone is shot, the most important thing is how to treat this wound as soon as possible so the guy doesn't die. So because in the early days, there was some confusion, but now from what I heard, they teach the guys immediately how to save the guy's leg and everything and send him to the rear within the first hour so he doesn't die. So there was an improvement in how they carry out this thing. And these veterans, because they're veterans, are teaching all these little tricks to the new guys, which makes these new guys very performant in combat.
What about the Ukrainian side? Because when I read about these Western training programs, they're talking about bringing. Now they're admitting that these are green conscripts just pressed into service, no military background, no previous training, and they're going to get a couple of weeks of training, not months, weeks of training, and they're going to be sent back to Ukraine. And who are they going to be trained by? Western NATO personnel who don't speak Ukrainian and who haven't been in a war like this ever. And so it's you could compare and contrast.
Well, one thing to highlight on the training, it is so basic. Learning how to clean and operate a rifle, learning how to march in formation, but the training that's not happening that comes over time when you conduct scale exercises, you are used and moving in conjunction with each other, or as you did, Brian, in the Marine Corps. Combined arms, where the officers are trained to use both artillery, air, and even naval gunfire if needed to be able to coordinate those in a fashion. That's not happening with these guys, not at all. It's the basic. Here is your IFAK, your individual first aid kit, IFAK. Here's the tourniquet. Here's how you put on the tourniquet. That's not a recipe for retaking Crimea.
No.
And for the Ukrainians, I think they also have some sort of people that come back from the front and everything. But one problem I read about the Ukrainian forces is that whenever there's a Russian breakthrough, they send everything in, all their reinforcements, but it's mixed units. And that's what causing the biggest problem is that there's poor coordination between one unit and another. And this is the biggest problem for the Ukrainians. This tactic of Ukraine of just sending in bodies to stop the Russians worked as long as the Russians didn't have more men. But now that the Russians brought 300,000 extra men to the front, this tactic is becoming very dangerous because they're literally pulling troops from all over the front to Bakhmut, for example, which leaves the other parts of the front in a very vulnerable state. And we see that the Russians are slowly creeping their way forward. You know, in Bakhmut, there's a lot of reports that units lack coordination. Of course, you send this battalion, this company, these guys, they don't know each other. They don't radio each other, and it's just a huge mess. And this is what's happening right now on the Ukrainian side.
And then you watch videos that are posted on Telegram of a single tank or a single APC taking out an entire platoon of Ukrainian troops who are just running into gunfire. It's absurd. There's so many of those. So many of these videos where these guys just run out into the open and get gunned down, blown up. It's like, what are you guys doing? Why are you doing this? Why are you running like a? I mean, it's like a video game almost, you know, where it's like a wave of enemies running at you, and the Russians are just shooting at them. Like,
and Ian, in my last video, you know, one guy I know actually went to Ukraine to interview Ukrainian soldiers for side project, and he asked me if I had any questions for them. So he spoke to some foreign fighters because that's what I asked him. And in my video, I talk about it, but I'll summarize it here. Every foreign fighter I talk to, directly or indirectly, they always say that planning military operations with the armed forces of Ukraine is always a cluster F. It's always a huge mess because imagine you're supposed to attack some trenches. You're just infantry, and you're supposed to be supported by tanks and armored vehicles. And when you're in the field, the tanks don't show up. Actually, they never arrived. They never came. You call for air support, no, not air support, artillery, they don't answer. And it's always a mess. Nothing is planned. And then you suffer huge casualties. And I think this is a recurrent theme, and this is exactly what you're talking about, Ian. I think these Ukrainian guys were told, yeah, you're going to run into this field, and then you're going to be supported by artillery. But it never happens. And then they get gunned down.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's really sad.
Did you guys see the extended interview of Andrew Milburn, the head of the Mozart Group, that he did with these special ops guys?
Yeah, that was a good one.
And Larry, tell the chat so that they're up to speed. And by the way, you should check out Larry at sonar21.com, where he has all kinds of very, very good blog posts and where you can find this interview. Larry, please go ahead.
So Milburn is a retired Marine colonel, unlike any Marine colonel I've ever run across. I mean, I was mentored by one. This guy is a bit of a clown. But he went to Ukraine, set up someone named it the Mozart Group, I guess his financial backers. And what's interesting about the interview is in it, he candidly admits that the Ukrainians, many Ukrainian groups, were committing atrocities and committing war crimes. And he commented heavily about the incompetence of the Ukrainian leadership, the lack of providing supplies. When you look into Milburn more deeply, he was the one that appeared in that CBS 60 Minutes interview. Remember that, where they were talking about none of the equipment and supplies getting to the front. And he was confirming that. And he does make a sort of a telling admission in this that he has never encountered anything like being shelled by the Russians in his entire military career, which goes to, underscores a point that Brian was making earlier. So it's really worth watching. The one thing that struck me at the end, I'm not a prude on this, but he started talking openly about his use of marijuana and some other drugs. And, that's fine if you're an average guy doing that, but this is a Marine officer, for God's sake. If he had someone, he would have court-martialed Brian if he caught Brian doing that kind of thing. And Brian, you may want to comment on that.
Yeah, or at least non-judicial punishment. Maybe have the snake bites on your collar. People might know what that is if you're in the military. But this is the thing, and you see all kinds of analysts and all kinds of people. First of all, you see people making these admissions about the reality on the ground, and then you see these analysts who are supposed to be, professionals and the experts on this. This guy, Michael Kaufman, I've been following his podcast with some other guy on War on the Rocks since this began, just to see how their point of view has evolved over the course of the special military operation. And they're perplexed as to why Russia is putting this pressure on Bakhmut. They can't understand why they're doing this, because it's not going to help them break through and then sweep toward Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. But General Sergei Surovikin has already said this is about grinding the military down. It's not about taking territory. They're openly telling you what this is about, and yet they still don't seem to get it. They're like, what should we do? And so let's just keep feeding the army into the Russian. Russia is picking the battlefield, and they are executing the plan. It's perfect. And Ukraine and their Western backers are just feeding sometimes I just wonder. Are they this stupid, or am I missing something?
We're doing this thing, and they're like, no, it can't be possible. You're keeping a secret. We're gonna keep throwing men at this meat grinder.
And the other thing that Western analysts seem to miss out is that on one end they say Ukrainians are sending massive reinforcements to Bakhmut. Fine. Where do these reinforcements come from? Oh, those are all the men that were supposed to counterattack in the Kherson region. You know, that offensive that would break the back of the Russian army. All these men in Zaporizhia that were meant to attack Melitopol were sent to Bakhmut. That means that not only the Russians are grinding down Ukrainian forces, but also the troops that were meant to win by spring, you know? So where do these reserves come from? Nobody seems to ask. And so I think it's very shallow. Like, these analysts don't seem to go further, or they're paid not to do it. I don't know, but it's kind of
what's interesting, Alex. This Michael Kaufman guy also at the same time saying this, he was like, yes, all of these men and all of this ammunition going into Bakhmut is going to be needed elsewhere in the very near future, and they're not going to have it. It's like that, exactly. That's why they're putting pressure on Bakhmut. I want to go back to what Larry was talking about. If you're a Marine major, you're a senior officer, you have serious responsibility, and you have to have certain human qualities in order to do your job properly and to handle the responsibilities and the pressure that come with it. And if you're, you see this increasingly across the West, people that don't take that seriously, they lead a lifestyle that is incompatible with these responsibilities. Like Larry said, if you're just a regular person, you want to smoke pot, that's fine. But if you have these huge responsibilities, I mean, it's going to contradict one another, and it's going to have real world consequences. And you see a whole system in the West that is a combination of all of these personality disorders among people that need to have their act together and have the ability to perform these responsibilities, and they cannot. And we're watching the outcome of this on the battlefield, all across geopolitics elsewhere. I mean, it is very troubling.
One of the reasons for the zero tolerance within any military organization is, okay, you've got these officers, but the privates and the corporals who may be in charge of maintaining equipment, repairing an aircraft, for example, or repairing a tank. If their minds are clouded, whether it's by drugs or alcohol, and they make a mistake, that mistake gets people killed. And so that's ultimately what the value of a true officer is. An officer wants to prevent his men from being killed. He has a response. He understands that he has a responsibility for their welfare and well-being. And then within the Marine Corps in particular, they have a code that officers eat last. Now, I came from the CIA, and when I moved to the State Department's Office of Counterterrorism, I wound up working for a retired Marine colonel. He had commanded the 5th Marines. And he kept telling me this thing about officers eat last. Well, out at CIA, their motto is officers eat first and eat often. In other words, they don't take care of their troops. They bend them over a log and have their way with them, like Ned Beatty in Deliverance. So
squeal like
sorry about that. No, but it is. I always called it was the fuck your buddy club out at the CIA. Whereas this Marine officer I served under at State Department, he lived that code, and I considered him a second father, because he was a man of a great honor and integrity, and didn't broker any kind of this juvenile crap that you see from this Andrew Milburn. I mean, I was really shocked by it, and I sent it to a couple of my buddies who they left the Marine Corps as majors and moved to State Department to work in the counterterrorism office. And one of them wrote, he said I could only watch for about 20 minutes. He said it made my hair hurt. So he had to stop. Just he couldn't tolerate it. Let me make one other observation. The observation is this: I think U.S. policy, U.S. foreign policy, has become a victim of Hollywood. And here's what I mean by that. And Gonzalo, you know this to be the fact. If you go in to make a pitch, you going to make a pitch. The first question is, who's the villain? You got to have a villain. Well, that has become U.S. foreign policy going back, as long as I was involved with the CIA. We had the villain. Marcos became the villain in the Philippines, or Noriega in Panama, and Muammar Gaddafi. If we only just get rid of the villain, then all of a sudden the problems go away. And they don't. That's why they villainize right now Putin. If they get rid of Putin, do they think that Joan of Arc is going to come in to rule, or Pope Benedict or something? I mean, it's ridiculous. And yet this sort of juvenile mindset has taken hold of Washington, D.C. They can't be nuanced or sophisticated.
Exactly right. And by the way, we're joined by Mark Sleboda. Mark, it's so good to see you. Now we're going to talk about hardcore military, because between Larry and Alex of History Legends and Mark and Brian, I mean, I think that we've decided that it's time to really bring out the big guns. And so here Mark is. How's it going, man? So good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me, Gonzalo. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Alex, Brian, Ian, Larry.
Hi there.
Hey, you guys all look familiar for some reason.
Yeah.
Well, about something that Larry was saying, one of the things that people have said is that the Russians have lost generals, that they've been killed in the fighting, right? And I actually forgot who said this or pointed this out. It might have been you, Larry, but that this is a huge morale booster for the Russians, because the Russian soldiers know that their commanding officers are there on the field, taking it with them, as it were, and some of them die. And that's a tragedy, of course, but they feel that they are being led from the front, whereas the NATO approach is to have the officer corps in the back. And this was originally implemented, Brian or Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, this was originally implemented in the Zelensky regime forces, and this had catastrophic morale results. I don't know if they've changed this. Mark, I think that you know about this. You'd be on top of this particular issue insofar as morale of the two sides is concerned.
Yeah, one of the things, it certainly does have casualties among the higher officer corps, and the West and the Kiev regime propaganda has been quick to play that up. One, always exaggerating the number of Russian generals, and higher military officers killed. But they completely overlook that, because it is entirely outside the realm of Western military experience to have men, officers of that rank leading forces in the field.
Yeah, Brian?
That's how they used to lead soldiers. Armies in the Middle Ages, right? The general would be in front. George Washington would ride alongside his men. That was what they used to do. And now it's they're just calling in a hit from long distance and saying, "Yeah, do this." They have no skin in the game whatsoever.
That's the issue. That's the issue I wanted to get out. No skin in the game, because it's like the entire Western leadership cadre. They carry out policies, but none of them affect them. And so they are ignorant as to the real world effects of their policies and their actions and the orders.
Yeah. Even Napoleon rode into battle, right? That's what they used to do. That's why people walked alongside them, marched alongside them, fought alongside them. That was what a leader did. He led from the front. They don't do that anymore. Not in the
It has
West,
to be
anyway.
noted that there's more than 24 Russia Duma members, MPs,
Yep.
and even a number of senators, 3 or 4 senators, and all had prior military experience and stepped down from their positions to participate in the SMO. So that's
Yeah, I mean,
that is definitely some skin in the game.
And their sons too, their children
Yes.
are fighting there. If they're daughters, they're they're paramedics, right? I mean, this is the Russian military. They're all
There
in.
are some, yeah. There are other Duma members, it has to be said, who have gotten their kids out of Dodge. It is not universal.
Not
but
universal.
I think there's definitely still more skin in the game. Yes.
Definitely no bone spurs issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I got a question
compared to
for
Poroshenko, they found him in some cafe in London. Remember that video that they found him having high tea in some nice shishi cafe in London with his military age kid. What the hell is the kid doing in London? Why isn't he at the front? Oh, well, we know why now, don't we? I really
has
that.
a question about the Russian army, because it used to be under the Soviets, sort of the Tsarist model, where it was an officer corps that was in charge, and they did not really develop an NCO corps, the non-commissioned officers, the where you would basically what had happened in the U.S. military was you'd get a 22-year-old lieutenant coming out of West Point and get assigned to a unit, and you would have a 30-year-old, 32-year-old sergeant, and basically that sergeant schooled the lieutenant, because the lieutenant was not very skilled. Whereas in the Israeli military sort of modeled itself originally after the Tsarist model, so that what you would have is you have a 24-year-old captain, 24-year-old sergeant. So neither of them knew anything, but they were out there acting. So the Russian transition is and focus more on developing an NCO corps to provide leadership within the ranks.
Yeah, this is something that I think is that Russia has recognized that the Western military structure was in many ways superior in that regard. And there has been a big move, particularly with the contract soldiers, to move more towards that. Whereas I would say that with the conscripted soldiers right now, young Russian men are obliged, like in many Israel and many other countries, to do 1 year of military service, and it's for the most part guaranteed that they won't serve in a combat zone. It is really more about building a societal foundation, a base for a potential large scale conflict, but also I think a sort of social engineering. But just in the past week, we have heard major reforms to that process coming out, where the age is going to be gradually increased from 18 to 21. They don't want 18-year-old boys anymore. They want people who have some technical or some college experience, and they want them somewhere between the ages of 21 and 30. And also, Mark, they will be doing 2 years, not 1.
And Mark, that's the other thing. I think in the Western world, and let's say Russia included, okay, but because of the modern lifestyle, people age at a slower rate than they used to. So an 18-year-old during World War II is not the same as an 18-year-old today. An 18-year-old in 1940 was already a man, almost independent. He was working and they had a tough life. But now an 18-year-old is playing video games in his mom's basement and is drinking Mountain Dew. You can't compare these two. It's true. They're eating they're eating Cheetos, Mountain Dew, and they're like, "Mom, feed me." And then these guys, you send them to the military. Of course, they're not gonna like it. They're not gonna like the authority. So, of course, and we see even the mobilized personnel, they're older in their 30s because they want people with maturity. And exactly like Larry Johnson said, an officer, you have to take care of your men, but when your men are literally kids, it makes it very complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really sure, because at 18 I went right into the Navy, so I don't really have that experience. But are you suggesting, Alex, that playing Call of Duty does not make you a man?
Or a military expert, apparently.
Unless you talk to Sergeant Grossman or whatever that guy's name is, Colonel Grossman. Yeah, he claims that playing Call of Duty is just as good as military training.
Wow.
Yeah. Analysts, man. Like I can't.
And I think in overall, I think waiting for 21 is also good, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, right? But a lot of Russian kids, when they're done high school, they hesitate between the military and college. And they're like, oh, I'm going to go to college, so I don't have to go to the military and all this. But now if the age is 21, they can go to college, and then they grab them once they're out.
Yeah, that's the goal. And Russians go to college, university earlier as a general rule. It's 16, 17 max. So that's when they start university. So at 21, they are done university. And it has to be said that there's a much broader, I would say, rather than full-fledged university, college level institutions of technical training. In the U.S., that's kind of really done with the military. If you want technical skills, people go to the military, and then companies hire people. That's I actually got hired in semiconductor engineering right out of nuclear engineering in the Navy, and they were hiring large numbers of ex-military people because they've got the technical skills, where the U.S. doesn't have a big range of really good technical institutions below the university level that train people for those things. In the U.S., military does that.
Like one of my good friends worked radar in the Navy, and now she works for one of those big companies as defense contractors, Raytheon. As a trainer, teaching them how to use these radar systems and developing them as well. So
remember, there is a downside to raising the age that you want to recruit people. Remember, in World War II, both the Navy and Army Air Corps, they wanted guys who were 18 and 19 years old because they believed that they were bulletproof, that they wouldn't die. And it's when you hit about 21 or 22, you go, oh, wait a second, man, this shit could kill me.
Yeah, it was bad reasoning too, because they found out later on that many of these 18-year-olds missed their shots on purpose, right? They were not, the killer machines that the military thought they would be, and in fact, they did quite the opposite.
And there's this question too, where we might think, is sending younger people to war makes it more likely for them to have PTSD? I don't know. It's a question.
Yeah.
No,
is it true? I don't know. Is
probably
the fact that you send a 17-year-old in Afghanistan or a 30-year-old man, how do they react to war? I don't know. It's a question, but I think the age has a lot to do.
Yeah, and the nature of combat has changed. I mean, in the modern military, Alex, I think the numbers that I've heard, that like 5% of a modern first world military can expect to actually fight, at a distance where they see the enemy. The rest of it is, the backup, the artillery, the Air Force, the technicians, the logistics, everything else that makes up a military. The actual number of troops that engage where they can actually see the enemy is like 5%.
What about the situation in Ukraine? What I find interesting is that you saw these U.S. soldiers, say in Afghanistan, and they've got the enemy pinned down, and they call it an airstrike. Now they're the ones getting airstrikes called in on them, or artillery. It's not fun anymore for them. I just wonder in Ukraine, because I've seen a lot of footage. They have to clear these trenches and that is up close and personal. I mean, you just see from because they've got a drone directing them from up above, and you can watch them going through, and it's face to face. I mean, it's pretty rough stuff.
And you know what's interesting? From these footage of trench clearing, it's exactly the same way it is portrayed and explained in old World War I movies from the 1920s. When you see the old World War I movies done by veterans, for veterans, you see them actually, there's no bayonet and hand-to-hand combat. They just throw one grenade after another until it's over. And it's the same thing today. So it's interesting to see how the same situation with trenches is the same way to solve the problem.
Well, this is a land-centric war that the U.S. was not expecting. So this kind of changes things back. I think it definitely has elements. But even there, correct me if I'm wrong, but how many times have you seen Russian regular army troops storming trenches and buildings? Right? That's done by Wagner. That is done by the Chechens in the National Guard.
And the Republic militias.
The LNR, the DNR. That is not being done by the Russian regular army on a large scale.
Yeah.
No,
that's true.
I think what's really interesting about the Wagner group is that Prigozhin is the leader of them. Am I correct? How he went in, and we saw those videos of him going to Russian prisons and recruiting prisoners. Basically, it's sort of like out of Dune, the book, their own private Sauerkraut car. I mean, like, that was weird. And what was funny is
giving them a second chance.
Giving them a second chance. And on the West, they're like, oh, look, they're like getting prisoners. But haven't there been like movies like The Dirty Dozen? Where
The Dirty Dozen.
Exactly, The Dirty Dozen. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, first of all, it has to be said that the Kiev regime did that back in March.
That's true.
Yeah,
they let everyone out of the prison. They let all the neo-Nazis they had locked up. They let everyone out, and they just handed them all a gun.
Battalion. Yeah.
Yeah, but and it was important because, as I understand it, the Wagner group is taking out convicts who have been. There are certain crimes that they just don't accept. Others, sure, but whereas in March, they
like pedophiles. No pedophiles allowed. Yeah.
And also, there's one thing I heard. So it might be wrong. I don't know. But the fact that when people get their mobilization card, so Mark, correct me, right? Since you're there. So when guys get their card to be sent to the military, if they don't show up, they can go to jail, right? But then the Wagner group picks you up from jail and sends you anyway. So for a lot of people, it's a choice whether you go into the Russian armed forces or you try to escape, go to jail, and then you're sent in the front lines anyway.
As far as I understand, Wagner is completely voluntary. They're not looking for. I mean, it's really hard to understand the mentality.
I'm sorry, Mark. I overrode you.
I'm just. Yeah, sorry about that.
Go ahead. Oh, so Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that this really isn't new. Anyone ever heard of the French Foreign Legion?
Yep.
The French Foreign Legion
prisoners
had some convicts in it. In the United States, it used to be, particularly in towns, small towns, if you had a 17 or 18-year-old guy that had committed a crime, he was given the choice: you're going to jail or you go into the military. So that's why everybody that in the West right now that's going for the fainting couch because the Wagner group is prisoners are ignorant and hypocrites, in my view.
My platoon, my Marine Corps platoon in Paris Island, I had at least 2 young men who that happened to them. They were given a choice: jail or join the Marine Corps.
And these are who you want fighting for you because they're hard men. They're willing to do things that most people are not, and they're brave. I mean, like they're in prison for a reason, right? I mean, they are not built like other people, so of course you want them there. This idea of like the American military wants to remake itself as a they-them army, for really soft Zoomers, and it's like, what are you doing? I mean, you're gonna go up against the Wagner group? Are you serious? But you guys get triggered by being, misgendered or something. It's like, what the hell?
It's that they're planning the Wagner group by misgendering them. They're going to misgender them, and that's how the Wagner group are just going to roll over and die. I mean, I think that's their plan.
And the thing is, I wonder how many, like the composition of the Wagner group, like how many are previous special forces, how many men have experience, how many are in prisons. Like we only have rough estimations, and in the West they say, yeah, it's all convicts, but we don't know how many are foreigners.
Yeah.
We don't know.
There's Chinese
Probably-
soldiers in there. There's Chinese special
Maybe.
forces in there.
Maybe.
I
Maybe.
have a
Some of them are
question.
pilots. Like, they have helicopter pilots who are flying for Wagner, right? I mean,
Exactly.
RT puts out details of Air Force pilots in Wagner. They have a fleet. So these are not like convicts. They're actually professionals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wagner
I
has some 20,000 troops now.
Yeah,
Right?
it's getting pretty big.
That's not small.
No,
Yeah,
these are hardened guys. I mean,
If
I'd
you-
be scared.
They have an enormous,
They're badass.
brand new office building
I saw that.
in St. Petersburg. It is really nice. I mean, it's like Fortune 500 company stuff, and the motivation for a lot of these convicts, right? Of course, there's you serve your time and you get out and your slate is wiped clean. But also one of the big selling things to them is if you die when you're there, you are guaranteed to be buried in a hero's cemetery.
It's redemption.
That's a big
It's like
thing for Russians with grandfathers who died fighting Nazi Germany. That's actually a serious motivation to have your life, every mistake you've made wiped clean, and you're dying, but you're being died with your heroic grandfathers. That's something a country that lost 30 million people, a country that lost 300,000 people in World War II can't really understand that.
They are like
I've-
modern day crusaders. I mean, the crusaders are the same way. Most of the people who went to the Holy Land in the Middle Ages were prisoners, convicts, people that were trying to find redemption, right? And they went there fighting a holy war, and they found that redemption. Many of them did, and that's why they fought so hard. That's why they're such a powerful fighting force. And Wagner's the same way.
Yeah.
I got a question. We keep hearing from the Western media that in Bakhmut, Wagner is sending, human waves of prisoners in, and then behind. So what do you make of these reports? And they're admitting that Ukraine is suffering heavy losses, but it's some of their best troops. And then they're admitting, at least this is what they're claiming, that the heavy losses on Russia's side are these prisoners that they seem to not care about. So I mean, how from the Western media's point of view is that victory if you're losing your best men fighting human waves of prisoners that they're depicting as Russia just disposing of?
It's funny because moments ago, like before jumping into the live stream, someone sent me something by saying, I'm a great fan of your channel, but I saw this video on Reddit about human wave attacks and you say it doesn't happen. And I'm like, all right, let's have a look at this footage of a human wave attack. And it's just 6 to 10 men walking from one foxhole to another, and that's it. And I'm like, is that a human wave attack, really? Is that the best you could find as a footage? It's a squad moving. At one point, you need to move out of your trenches to go towards the enemy. You have to. And this is what they call a human wave attack. They say, look, they have no armored support and everything. And I'm like, okay, you guys are really digging far to find something that fits your narrative. Like completely
Well, that's the thing.
nuts.
They spew this bullshit, and they have to scrape the bottom of the barrel for nonsensical footage to buttress their bullshit. And
Narrative.
Go ahead, Mark.
A narrative framing rule of the U.S. media is all Russian troops are conscripts, right? Reservists, contract, everyone is a conscript. While Ukraine, which has all conscripts, they're not actually conscripts, they're all volunteers. I mean, that's the rule. And when you see that the Kiev regime right now is particularly, they're on their 10th, 11th wave of mobilization, right? With all men between the ages of 16 and 60 not allowed to leave the country. They're drawing particularly heavy on two regions right now. One of them is Kharkov, which is an ethnic, has a higher degree of ethnic Russian than any other area of Ukraine other than the Donbass, right? And the other region is in the southwest, Zakarpattia, which is a mountainous hill region where there is a substantial Hungarian ethnic minority who the treatment of them has Viktor Orban seeing red all the time. That's one of the major reasons why Hungary is this standout political from the EU on the whole conflict in Ukraine thing.
So
And-
Mark, basically, they're carrying out a kind of like de facto ethnic cleansing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what they're doing.
And they're getting them now, because if things start to fall apart, they won't be able to get those people later, because those will be the first ones that they lose control of, right? The ethnic Russians, right? So later they can rely on the West Ukrainian Galicians and Ivano-Frankovsk and Ternopil and so on. But right now, let's push as many of the potential collaborators. And Zakarpattia has a long history, if you take a look at the voting in Ukraine, of even though it's in the very far southwest, it always voted with the party of regions, the ethnic Russian regions, because they were, pro-ethnic Russian? No, but because they were also an ethnic minority that was treated so bad for so many decades by Kiev, that the party of regions treated them better than the pro-Western nationalist parties when they got control of Bankova in Kiev.
And
So they're also regarded as politically unreliable. And that's why you're seeing so many mountain units in battles in Bakhmut and elsewhere, right? Mountain specialists and so forth. It's because they're from Zakarpattia.
They're all dying.
They're being sent to serve as cannon fodder first.
And there's one thing this year also that I find weird in the Western media is that when you look deeper into the war, Ukraine, Russia, to me, as a foreigner, it looks to me like some sort of civil war in a way, because they're so similar in a way. But the West, in the Western media, they refuse to talk about it because when I speak to people that have zero knowledge about the war, they see one country getting attacked by another. They don't understand that, okay, most of them didn't even know that Ukraine and Russia were part of the same country not too long ago. I swear, most people don't even know that the USSR encompassed both countries and don't even know about the Russian Empire and all this. So it's a very complex war that is very similar to a civil war. Just like
it is
you
a
said,
civil
Mark.
war.
It's a civil war, yeah.
The moment you talk about collaborators, this is a synonym for a civil war. You would only collaborate if you have ties with the other side, right?
There are tens of thousands of East Ukrainians who have been fighting against the regime, not only since February, but for 8 years beforehand. And all the time you're reading Western media reports about hundreds of collaborators being grabbed here, hundreds of collaborators in this city there, 600 collaborators in the Ukrainian intelligence services, right? And no one ever asked the question, why are so many people willing to turn to the evil aggressor against?
It bothers me, right? Like the way the West talks about it, they make it seem as if these so-called collaborators are, helping the Nazis. It'd be like as if Americans were helping the Nazis. That's how they envision it, that the Nazis invaded America and these guys are working with the Nazis. So if they're hanged or if they're shot on the street or if they're tortured, they deserve it, right? That's how the West sees it. And I look at it and I'm like, that's not how it is. These guys are basically just Russians. They don't like the regime in Kiev. That's it. It's a civil war.
It's part of their narrative that justified the Maidan, right?
Yeah,
all Ukrainians were for it, and everyone since is just a subhuman pro-Russian separatist, right? They try to justify that violent and unconstitutional change of power and everything that has happened since. And Russian government will continually remind that this is where it all started. But the Western media narrative is this some kind of revolution by all the Ukrainian people to bring democracy and freedom to their country. And the funny thing is, if you take a look back, even in the U.S. run and at the time owned Kiev Post, it has since been taken over by a Ukrainian oligarch. But they had consecutive polls while the Maidan was going on by Western groups that were actually, polling groups that were actually employed by the U.S. International Republican Institute to gauge the level of public support for the Maidan as it was happening. And it was a minority. It was a close minority, right? It was like 51-48, 48-45, right? But the majority, or the plurality, if you will, was always against the Maidan. But what that shows more than anything, that it was a nearly divided country, which has reflected the voting patterns, the sociological patterns in Ukraine. If you know anything about Ukraine, and I've been in and out of Ukraine, my wife is Crimean, and we've got family in the Donbass, Kharkov, Odessa. I've been in and out of Ukraine for the last 20 years, a month, a year. So I'm pretty familiar with it. Everyone in Ukraine knew a civil war was coming, right? There were science fiction conventions about the future civil war in Ukraine.
Many companies moved out. They moved to places like Malta, right? One big video game publisher after another just moving out of the country because they knew it was coming, a civil war.
Hey, Brian, remember when we had on Michael Tracy? And
Yes.
he was saying that the referendums were illegitimate because 95+% of the people in the Donbass voted to join Russia. And we were like, come on, man, if you're getting shelled by the people who want to kill you actively and shelling civilians, of course it's going to be 95+%. And he just couldn't believe it.
And if you go out to West Ukraine and you look at election results out there, you'll see 95% are for, the pro-Maidan, the pro-nationalist, the anti-party of regions, candidate. And those are real too, because the people out there feel very strongly. You have two polar opposite conceptions of Ukrainian national identity. West Ukraine, right? Who the most basic pillar of their national identity conception is to hate Russians, right? That goes back to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That's it in a nutshell. Yeah, they don't like Poles. They don't like Jews historically. They don't like lots of other people. But first and foremost, and certainly first on the burner right now, is they hate Russians. Whereas the people of East Ukraine, Russians, they're my family. That's my cousin. That's my uncle across the border, right? So they have a completely different. They do seriously regard them as brother people. And even Zelensky himself is on tape while he was running for office saying there could never be a war between Russia and Ukraine because we're the same people. Of course, he would never say that now, right? And when Putin says that, he's some kind of mad ultra-nationalist, right? But that's really the way the people. He's from Dnipropetrovsk, right? He's from East Ukraine. Now, the people of central Ukraine, right, the Kiev area there, they don't have a strong national identity conception. They're follow the political zeitgeist and whatever gives them the greatest amount of money in their wallet that they can guess in the near future. And so that's the vacillation that you've seen in Ukrainian politics between, the Orange Revolution candidates, the Party of Regions, switch to the Maidan parties, the opposition bloc, and it's central Ukraine that has always swung back and forth playing the kingmaker in elections. But when you take 2 million solidly pro-Russian voters in Crimea out of that equation, suddenly you had a permanent Maidan majority.
I hadn't thought of it that way. That's actually a very astute observation.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Wow. First time I've heard it that one, but
that's by the way, about Crimea, I've noticed the West is obsessed with recapturing Crimea. My thinking is that it's NATO driven. It's Washington driven, that is their real obsession, that they cannot get over the fact that the Russians grabbed Crimea before they could after the 14 coup.
That's insane.
And they keep on talking about how they're going to take Crimea. Well, like you guys were saying before, that they're going to take it by the springtime and all the rest of it. And all these analysts and strategists keep driving this point that, oh, you can capture Crimea by cutting through the Russian land bridge and taking it over. It's just
They fantasize
absurd.
about Kaliningrad as well, right? They're like, we can take Kaliningrad, we can cut them off.
Forget about the military impossibility of that. What are they going to do? Genocide 95% of the population in Crimea?
Maybe. I wouldn't put it past them, man.
My introduction to Russian-Ukrainian identity politics, I met my wife. She's from Crimea. She's from Simferopol at a goth industrial fetish club in Boston.
Okay, we're not going to ask.
So
You wanna-
she was doing her MBA at Harvard, and I was out of the military in the semiconductor engineering field at the time. And I met her at the club, and I heard her. And I'm a Slavic mutt. I've got Russian and Slovak ancestors, and so I heard her voice, and I'm like, "Oh, you're from somewhere in Eastern Europe?" And she says, "Yes, I'm from Crimea." And I said, "Oh, you're Ukrainian." And she slapped me across the face. And that was the moment I fell in love with my wife. And it was also my introduction to the complicated
Getting a little personal now.
national identity politics of Ukraine.
So Brian, do you want anything to that? Add anything to that?
Well, I just want to. Well, I'll just leave that word. I just want to ask about something else here. They want to. The West wants to say, well, this. We're going to turn Ukraine into Vietnam or another Afghanistan for Russia. But we're talking about how it's very much like a civil war. And this isn't Russia going to the other side of the planet and invading a country. This is had been part of Russia. They have home field advantage. I think it's more like when the U.S. was propping up the regime in South Vietnam. That is the regime in Kiev right now. It's very similar to the regime in South Vietnam. So I just want to ask how people feel about that. I also want to ask, I've already talked about my own views on this, but the Western media depicts this trench warfare in Ukraine as archaic, and because Russia is so backwards and their military is so dysfunctional, that's why they have to resort to this. But I always felt that it's because both sides have modern weaponry, large amounts of well-trained troops, at least in the beginning, and this is the reason why. This is what would happen to any two sides. You're not going to resort to maneuver warfare and blast through these defenses. So I just wonder what other people think about that.
Well, when you look at the way the U.S. defeated the Iraqi military twice, actually, the big problem of the Iraqi military is that they left their troops out in the open. The big problem is that they did not fortify and build bunkers and underground positions against the Air Force. Look at what Hezbollah did. Hezbollah against Israel, they dug down. They hid under earth so they can't be visible from above. It's entirely normal because their weapons now are so lethal that, of course, it's going to happen. Even in World War II, people were fighting in foxholes and trenches. Look at pictures. The Eastern Front was littered with trenches. This is normal because if you expose yourself, you're going to get killed. Because I think in the West, they're so used to fighting guerrilla wars that, of course, if you're fighting guerrilla, you can't hide in a foxhole. You have to hit and run. But if there's a front line, where'd you let your guys? You're not going to hide behind a tree. You're going to dig and hide. This is just the normal way of doing. And the Iraqis did not do that, and they got slapped in a month.
Remember, one of the fundamental things you learn in basic training is the difference between cover and concealment, because you're trained for cover that protects you from ammunition, bullets, fragments coming through. You hide behind something that can protect you. But I think there's another dimension here that it really parallels the U.S. Civil War, with Ukraine being in the position of the Confederacy, and from the standpoint of lacking the industrial base to sustain the war, lacking the population, the number, manpower compared to what the North, or in this case, Russia has. It's simple mathematics. If both sides are losing at the same rate, Ukraine's going to run out of manpower before Russia does, long before Russia does. And that basic point seems to have escaped most of the analysts in the West, that they're ignoring this, that there is no, let's put it in financial terms, sort of a burn rate of a corporation going through money. Ukraine cannot sustain this burn rate. It's just that simple.
Yeah,
That's
but
a
then the
burn rate on their weapons
Confederacy
as
would
well.
have to be economically supported by the United Kingdom, France, the Russian Empire, and everyone else, every other major power at the time.
Well, right, but even with that, you get back to the manpower issue. Where are you going to get all these other, this cannon fodder to throw into the trenches? One observation on the trench: what has made current trench warfare different from World War I? Drones, overhead imagery. You got real-time surveillance, and the Russians have an advantage on that over the Ukrainians because they're integrated the communication, the drones, with actual people on the ground on those front lines, so that they can react and use that information.
And Starlink turned off its drones on the battlefield.
Oh, did it?
And drones and
Yep.
vision from above, satellites, drones also make it very hard for surprise attacks and encirclements nowadays. I think this is what a lot of people forget. When they talk about a Russian offensive, they say, yeah, the Russians are going to attack from a new front and all this. I'm like, okay, don't you think that the 200 satellites will know exactly where you put your forces? An encirclement is only possible if you have a surprise effect on the enemy. Nowadays, there's no counter for that. So there's no encirclement or surprise attack. Even on the ground level, yes, the attacker has drones, the defender has drones too. So it's a matter of who has the best information and all this. But this also explains the slow grind. There's not surprise anymore. And I would like to hear what you guys say about this, and then I'll head out in a minute or two.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It was on my list of 3 things to bring up today, that there is no surprise. Everyone knows what everyone else is going to do on this battlefield. It's all choreographed out. The best you can do is spread out your forces with misdirection and hope that there's not human and signals interception, revealing too much at the point of time. But actually, because Ukraine is getting all this real time, these battle tablets and everything that they've been handed from the US, for a first few months of this war, I think that the Kiev regime actually had an advantage in this regard, because there wasn't a lot of Russian satellites focused on Ukraine, right? This was a mistake a gap in their satellite coverage. But in late October, early November, they put up a bunch of military satellites that, from what I've heard, has vastly improved and put on a par, given them capabilities equivalent to Starlink and better focus on the Ukrainian battlefild. Incidentally, China has the Pentagon is freaking out about this. They said they just put out an assessment in the last month, saying that they can no longer win a war in the Taiwanese Straits, principally because of the number of satellites that China has put up since 2018. It's a big number, so that is a factor of this warfare, and I think the drones is another thing there. The other thing is, I don't know, Alex, and Brian, if you've been paying attention to the daily hit lists of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Take it with a grain of salt and all, but I find it's a lot more accurate than any other version of what's out there. But you'll notice that in the last 3 weeks, particularly in the last week, there have been a huge numbers of Kiev regime artillery pieces, HIMARS.
I noticed that. Yeah.
The
reason for that is that Russia just put out a new batch of the 1B-76 penicillin. They're advanced thermal acoustic counter battery radar systems. They just sent out a whole new batch of them out to the fronts, and supposedly these double the range of the previous systems. they computer interact with all of the artillery stations in the area, and when the opponent fires within their range, within 5 seconds, every artillery piece as part of that counter-military unit gets the coordinates to fire back on. And it is supposed to be, and it because it doesn't rely on electromagnetic, it can't be jammed, right? So they're calling it, one of Russia's EW warfare game changers. I think it's actually showing. I mean, I imagine eventually they will adapt to it, just like Russia has adapted to the HIMARS and everything. But right now, it's giving them, as far as I can see, a big, a greater degree of accuracy in counter battery radar fire that the Russian Ministry of Defense hit list is showing a significant result.
And last words before I head out. I also noticed a lot of anti-air batteries getting destroyed lately. I think the Russian missile strikes have a second goal of pinpointing on the anti-air batteries. They also use decoys. And the moment the Ukrainians don't have any more anti-air defense, then this is when the helicopters can go on to ground support and all this. So I'll let you guys talk about this. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the invite. I'll head out, but it was a pleasure talking to you and Gonzalo. And thanks for the invite.
And it's always a pleasure to have you on, man. You take care.
Watch you all the time, Alex.
Thanks, Mark. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Well, we have one Alex stepping out and another coming in.
Another Alex is here.
Stein. How's it going, man?
Must
Follow him
always
on
have at
Twitter.
least one
Follow him on
Alex on the stream.
It's great.
Absolutely.
Only
Actually,
one
I was-
Alex allowed at a time.
No, but it was a prerequisite. There has to be at least one Alex throughout the entire show, or else it's not like a real show. So great having you on, man. How's it going?
Well, it's good. Okay, but I don't want to derail the whole conversation. But Gonzalo, so you know who's fighting with me? The one, the only quad titty rage pig, Ethan Ralph, is coming after me. And I know you have beef with Ethan Ralph, Gonzalo.
Oh,
so
God.
tell me, how did you get that rage pig from biting your ankles? Because now I got bites all over my ankles. All he does is tweet about me all day long because I won't go to his wrestling event. His adult wrestling event for
for chat and for everybody here. Ethan Ralph is just a lol cow, Ethernet lol cow. And just to do a quick parentheses on this fool, see, he got incredibly pissed off at me because when was it? Early this year, as a matter of fact. He got beat up in Portugal. He's
really bad.
Up to somebody, yeah. And I when I saw that, I tweeted out a picture of his morning and my morning, which was with somebody lovely. And because of that, he's just never gotten over it, the poor pig. But anyway, Ethan Ralph, just ignore him. I mean, it's a lol cow that is just, or ask him, no, I can't say it because this is a family.
Well, say it off camera, but just give me anything to ask him. Also, because this is the thing is like I don't want to go in the.
Ask him about his sex tape. Ask him about.
I know. I've already talked to him about the Memphis micro penis. I've already brought it up to his face. Everybody knows. I'm just saying it's so funny because we're here talking about like geopolitical conflicts, but at the same time, it's easy to get derailed with internet drama about a guy's micro penis and revenge porn cases. So it's weird what the human psyche is interested in, like drama or like geopolitical conflict.
See, Alex, my thinking is the following. See, the life of a man cannot be focused on just a few serious things. It has to encompass the gamut of the human experience. And so, for instance, with these wonderful gentlemen, I've been talking about geopolitics and about very serious things, but at the same time, I love me some internet drama. It's fun as all get out.
Well, Ian, you're always in internet drama. It's so pleasure. Yeah. It's a pleasure to finally be here. I know on the internet.
Likewise.
It just sucks. Well, and this is just what sucks too, is like the more followers you get, the more people that are going to be chirping and creeping at you. And it's just, it's just, I guess I'm not used to it. I didn't realize,
it's annoying as hell, but you get used to it, right? Like yesterday, all these leftists came after me because, Elon's been tweeting at me again and they don't like it, right? So yeah, and you just have to ignore it. Honestly, you just have to ignore it. Yeah, they're irrelevant.
Yeah, don't
worry about it because no one who sees them trolling you is going to care about what they're saying about you, right? Because they're lying for the most part. They're always just lying, and anyone with a brain sees that they'll be like, oh yeah, these guys are trolls. So the same people troll other people as well. So
But listen what they did. They made a fake text message that me and Marjorie Taylor Greene had sex, which Marjorie Taylor Greene and I are friends. But did you guys ever hear that rumor? There's a rumor going around that Alex Stein and Marjorie Taylor Greene are doing the hibbity-jibbity. And if that was the case, I would admit it. That's what these people are so dumb. If I had Marjorie Taylor Greene butt naked, you don't think I would take a selfie with that and post that on my Twitter and get 5 billion hits and become the most famous guy in America for 2 weeks? Yes, I would do that. I would release my sex tape. I studied the school of Kim Kardashian. You don't leave the sex tape in the drawer. You release it. That's how you go mega
Yeah, because
viral.
I mean, how else are you going to get a perfume deal, right? Am I right?
That's right.
Exactly right. I need a cologne,
Yeah.
That's all I need.
So you want to get yourself $1 billion fortune based on cologne? Release the sex tape. Let
Marjorie
the
Taylor Greene's butthole would make me $1 billion. The butthole to billion strategy. That's to be the name of the book that I would write.
Come for the geopolitics. Stay for the stories about banging congresswomen.
Well, okay. Honestly,
that's the motto of my show, man.
Well, but I'm saying if Marjorie Taylor Greene said, "Hey, Alex, I need you to, pleasure me," I would have to do it as a matter of just national security. I would have to do that to protect because I want to keep our politicians sharp. I don't want their brain all fogged up.
You're doing a public service.
Yeah. Because when you're horny, you're making bad decisions. You're voting on bills all wrong. You can't think. You guys have all been there. You know that. You can't think 2 feet ahead of you. But when you get rid of that baby batter, you're like a freaking Einstein. You're clairvoyant. Trust me, I'm telling y'all know that's the case. I mean, it's very anecdotal science, but that's the science that I believe the most.
Oh man, I was hoping to keep the conversation on the baby batter. Okay, great. That's just
Okay, well, let's talk about Ukraine. Is Putin about to? This is what I think about the conflict, and you guys are much more schooled on it than me. But at the very beginning of this conflict, couldn't we have just not had it if we just would have kept the Donbass region autonomous and they just said they wouldn't have joined NATO? Wasn't it just that simple, basically?
It is that simple, but they refused to abide by the Minsk protocols, and that's why Russia had to move.
Yeah, and also there was another factor that has only emerged as of late, is that the Zelensky regime was preparing an offensive to recapture the Donbass, and they were going to stage it in mid to late March. And so essentially the Russians beat them to the punch. There was going to be a war regardless. And the other thing too that you have to keep in mind, and Alex, you should tell people about it, is that it turns out that what the Russians suspected was actually true, which was that the West had no intention ever of implementing Minsk II agreements. Right. That would have ensured long-lasting peace. Angela Merkel, in 2 separate interviews, confirmed
she admitted
that it was just a move to buy time so that the Zelensky regime could acquire more forces and more gear.
Yeah, they were training up the in Canada.
But who do you think is giving Zelensky his marching orders? NATO right now is somebody. Or who do you think
Washington,
is giving him his orders?
Washington,
DC, literally.
Yeah,
that's what you think. So CIA or DOD or somebody or DOJ. Somebody.
No, it's the State Department. The people that to know is Victoria Nuland is the key figure. She's the key figure. She's the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. She's the one driving this. She was behind the coup d'etat in 2014. Mark can correct me if I'm wrong at any point of this story.
She was, yeah.
She was driving the coup of 2014. She picked the government that would take power after the coup d'etat, before the coup d'etat happened, okay? And she has been the driving figure of this, along with Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who's basically her lapdog, and they are the people driving this.
And Nuland goes back all the way back to the 2000s, where, in a recent congressional hearing, she admitted that the U.S. was building bioweapons labs in Ukraine.
Yes, she admitted.
And who is Nuland's husband?
Robert Kagan.
Robert Kagan.
Right.
I think one thing to pay attention to here is I think this goes beyond Newton. There's some very big money tied up in this that has been directing, and this has been a long-term project. This goes back to start the war in Libya, where it was all over access to oil rights that Gaddafi at the time was denying to France and to England. That attempt to overthrow that regime, then followed up with the attempt to overthrow the Syrian regime of Assad, going as recently as it's an effort to launch a coup in Kazakhstan. So it is not just one bureaucratic entity in Washington. This is I don't mean to conjure up some sort of conspiracy, but there are
Please
some.
conjure up a conspiracy, Larry. Conjure it up. We don't mind. Sorry, go ahead.
I've got a few
it's,
ideas too.
it's multiple interests converging on the
Yes.
same out. That's
I
what
mean,
And-
this
and-
even
and
includes
follow the
Klaus Schwab
follow the
and
money.
George Soros. Even Klaus Schwab and George Soros are involved in this. George Soros is heavily involved in Ukrainian politics. In Hungarian politics, he was banned for this specific reason. He's banned in Russia for this specific reason. Klaus Schwab's the same thing. And both of them are very, very connected to the next upcoming leader of NATO, right? Which is Christian Newland. Not Newland, what's her face? Christian Freeland. Yeah. And she has been handpicked by the State Department, the Biden administration, Victoria Newland. They picked her, they handpicked her to take that role. And guess what? She is she sits on the panel with Klaus Schwab. She's one of the board members of the WEF. And she's also the personal biographer of George Soros.
Yeah.
Isn't it? I'm not even making it up. It's insane.
Not just the Minsk Accords. This neutrality of Ukraine. Ukraine had neutrality enshrined in their constitution up until the government was overthrown in a U.S.-backed putsch in 2014. Right?
Yep.
It was in there. They couldn't join NATO. They couldn't join the Russian equivalent of NATO. Right? They had neutrality up until 2014. So this geopolitical flipping is a big change. And Larry, I would say it goes a lot further back than Libya, because all of this has happened before. In the 1950s, the CIA, I mean, this has been revealed, Freedom of Information Act peppers, led an insurgency on the ground. Like, they led on the ground an insurgency of these West Ukrainian former SS troops against the Soviet Union. You want to know what really kicked off the Cold War? That's what kicked off the Cold War. This has all happened before.
They did this stuff in Hungary too, and they lost.
If you go through old U.S. State Department documents back right after World War II, all they talk about is encircling and containing both, then the Soviet Union, now Russia, and also China. That's all they've ever talked about, and that's what everything involving U.S. foreign policy has been aimed toward doing, either directly at Russia and China or along their peripheries. And when we talk about if what all Ukraine had to do was follow the Minsk agreements and all of this, this was always supposed to be a proxy war from the very beginning. There was never any intention, and everyone has pointed out, they admit that they had no intention of ever upholding the Minsk agreement. It was just to buy time, just to escalate, and just to get this proxy war going. But as other people have pointed out, now they have the proxy war with Russia, and it's not really working out the way they imagined.
I mean, in 2016, you had Lindsey Graham there down in Ukraine, along with
McCain.
John McCain.
Those were Nazis.
Hanging out with Nazis, and then they sent those Nazis to Canada to train under the Canadian Special Forces. So
okay, well, let me ask this question. I understand why the globalists want us to start a war. I mean, we get out of Afghanistan, but why is Putin with failing health? What does he benefit by fighting a war with Ukraine?
Well, he keeps NATO outside his doorstep, number one.
Is that, I know, but is that what it is? It's almost like a pissing match because if they join NATO, he has to do it almost as like a...
No. It's bigger than that, and this has been one of, if you want to call the most important thing that happened in 2023, is the Russians finally came to realize they can't be friends with the West.
Yeah.
That there's nothing the Russians could do to ingratiate themselves, to prostrate themselves before the West that'll make the West like them. This is, take it back. This is like the most perverse, sadomasochistic high school you can imagine. You're trying to join the group of the cool kids, or you think they're the cool kids. And what Russia has discovered is that the West is morally bankrupt. It's in the process of financially bankrupting itself. And and Russia has now learned they can actually militarily bankrupt the West. Who would have thought that all these military industrial corporations in the United States that are sucking billions, tens of billions of dollars out of U.S. taxpayers would not be able to produce enough artillery shells in a month or in a year that would sustain Ukraine for even 2 days.
Yeah.
So this house of cards that the West has created is starting to crumble, and within that, you've heard now out of both Putin and Lavrov and Medvedev and across the board, they're not going back. This is not like you divorced your wife and now you've been apart for a while. But maybe we can get back together. No, this is irreconcilable differences that Russia finally has realized. The West is an untrustworthy, corrupt partner and cannot be trusted, and they've got to be self-reliant.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to ask this question too. I want to get y'all's opinion real quick on this. Just one thing. Can you win a modern day war? Because if you look at Vietnam, we lost that. You look at I just want to hear, because you guys have better examples than me. Because this might sound a dumb question, but then I look at our conflict in the Middle East. We lost that war in the Middle East. We spent $1 trillion, and we basically lost to the Taliban that were in Toyotas, and now they are the ones that are still there, and we're not. So my point is, can you even win? What does a modern day war win look like in this day?
Chechnya. It looks like Chechnya.
Chechnya.
Was that a
like
surrender? Did they just surrender in Chechnya? I don't even remember that conflict.
They killed all the Chechens who didn't ally with the government. And
So it was a genocide.
No,
it wasn't a genocide. No. What happened?
They were extremists backed by the West, because this is what the West has been doing to Russia for decades. Lighting fires all along their periphery and also within their borders. This is about self-preservation. Chechnya was about eliminating this proxy force. Chechnya is still there. The Chechen people are still there. Yeah. The Chechens that came out on the other side of that conflict are the most loyal, among the most loyal in the Russian Federation.
Hilarious guy. You should follow him on Telegram.
The Chechen Civil War was mostly Chechens killing other Chechens. Just like for 8 years, Ukraine was about Ukrainians killing other Ukrainians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, winning the war, Alex, is not about a military victory, because if it really goes back to Clausewitz, the war is just an extension of the politics. In the politics, the Russians seem to have a much better grasp of the international politics of eliminating this unipolar world that has dominated. The United States has controlled for the last 60 years. Now the U.S. ability to control it's being ripped away every day. Look, in the past, Saudi Arabia was our bitch. The Saudis, they had no alternative. Now the Saudis are like to Joe Biden, hey, go screw yourself. They're going to make friends with the Russians. So this victory that will come is not just going to be on the battlefield, but it's going to be in the creation of this alternative economic and global order that's not dependent upon the IMF, not dependent upon the World Bank, not dependent upon the US dollar. And that is the victory, because the United States miscalculated in an incredible way that they thought that they could crush Russia, that Russia had an economy the size of Spain, and that they were not self-dependent. Well, guess what? That was all wrong.
Yeah. Alex, just by the way, just so that you know, Larry Johnson, I don't know if you know him. He has a great website called Sonar 21 that's got a great blog on it. Larry Johnson is a former CIA officer.
Wow.
State Department,
don't hold that against me.
Well, now I don't like you, Larry. Now I hate you. I'm going to go read your blog, but that's not good.
No, but
those are the three worst letters in the alphabet. CIA, no way. Please,
Larry never threw one of the naughty, any of the friendly governments. He only overthrew the naughty.
Yeah. Well, he just talks about Libya. We talk about Libya is the only place where there's slave auctions right now. And Muammar Gaddafi was overwhelmingly supposedly loved by his people.
By his people.
He was beloved.
He could walk out on the street without protection. That's how much people love the guy.
Right.
Yeah, and supposedly they stuck a knife up his butthole or whatever. Yeah, right.
They murdered him. Fucking
Larry's exactly right, though. This is much bigger than Russia-Ukraine. Yeah. This is a war about the future of the global order.
Yeah. Yep.
And you asked the
liberal new world order versus the multipolar world order, which is what most of the world would benefit from.
I feel that actually it's going to end up as a bipolar world order, because the U.S. is making everyone choose. You're with us or you're with them. And everyone, you've got these dissimilar, politically different, civilizationally different countries Russia, China, Iran coming together. You know,
I'm with the side.
And
I'm with the
India.
side that
Nothing in
doesn't have trans kids, that doesn't have drag queen story hour. I'm with the side
Well,
that's not eating the
Ian,
bugs.
do you think that's playing a part
Yeah.
in this? You know, all
Yes,
the
Big time.
sexualization?
Oh
Yes.
yes, 100%, 100%,
Huge.
like 1,000%. Like that is one of the
Huge.
biggest wars that's being fought right now, and
Yeah,
we're,
because
we're in the forefront of
Well,
it.
rest
I'd
of the
say I'm
world-
on their side on that one. I mean,
No, because
I don't
in
think
the rest of the world, they look at this nonsense, the LGBTQP stuff, and all the rest of that bullshit, and they're horrified. And they don't want, transgender people at
And they're-
story hour for their kids.
they're
No,
gonna
they
promote
want a
this stuff
nice
in-
babushka who will read them, Misha and the Bear
traditional
shit.
family values. Is what
Traditional
they're
family
not-
values, and this is the stuff that the State Department, and the U.S. embassies throughout the entire world are trying to destroy. They literally go to other countries, they give their U.S. aid thing, which is like, hey, here's $2 billion, but your schools have to implement drag queen story hour. I mean, look at what was going on in Afghanistan. The American University in Afghanistan was teaching transgenderism to people who only barely just got their rights back, to women who only barely just got their rights back. We're taught about transgenderism and queer theory. It's like, of course they're going to reject it. They're going to be like, you know what? The Taliban don't seem so bad now.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
no, but the sexual indoctrination of children, I mean, in our country is obviously at an alarming rate. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I obviously side with Russia if they're fighting against that.
Yeah.
I mean,
You're a Russian
I mean,
bot. You're a Russian
Russian
stooge.
bot now
I
because
am.
you
No,
have
I am
traditional
a
family
Russian bot,
values and you're
yeah.
Christian.
Well,
Oh my God.
You've not had the problem, as I understand it, the Eastern Orthodox Church that you've had in the Roman Catholic Church of molesting children.
Yeah.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
Yeah,
That's right.
and again, that's one of this growth of, let's call it the pedophilia culture of the West it's exploded over the last couple of years. I mean, it's in your face all the time, and that's one of the things that Putin did mention about the moral degeneracy of the West. And he's not going to subject, if the West wants to do that, he said, fine, you go down that path. We're not. That is not our values. And that's I think part of what drives the media. Remember, that's what drives part of the media hatred of Putin. When you look at the number of homosexuals and transgender people that are involved with the media, they feel a threat from Putin, and that is why I think that's one of the things that's helping drive this, hatred towards Russia.
Yeah, but like Putin recently outlawed any kind of LGBTQ plus propaganda in Russia. It's
For
illegal.
kids, yeah.
Well, not
But
recently.
you can still have a gay
That's
club. You can
years
still have
ago.
a gay club. That's fine. But you can't be promoting, like, basically it targets grooming. That's what it is. It's an anti-grooming bill. Like, you don't call it an anti-LGBTQ plus whatever. It's actually an anti-grooming bill. That's the colloquialism for it. It's the same as DeSantis's bill.
Yeah, and exactly. And what happened was that kind of bill in Russia, 80-90% in favor of it. I mean, come on, honestly.
And
right?
it was
And the
led
states would do the
by
same.
leftists in Russia in the Duma. They were the ones who sponsored the bill, and everybody else was like, "Yeah, those guys are right."
Yeah.
Well, the problem here
because
too in America is that we have that ESG, environmental social governance, where all these corporations are spending a
social
lot of
credit.
their philanthropical dollars on basically the sexual indoctrination of children, thinking they're doing it under the guise of social justice. So it's like when you have the most powerful corporations, AT&T and Pfizer, paying for this to be at these libraries and stuff, you're never going to beat the multi-industrial complex. The multinational corporations, us as human beings, are never going to be able to beat their influence with politicians and just with everything else.
It's hard. I mean,
Hey, gentlemen, I hate to leave the party, but I've got another commitment I need to take place. I have so enjoyed being with everybody. It's been great.
Before you go,
Pleasure to meet you, Larry.
Before you go, Larry, chat, why don't you give a +1 for Larry before he leaves? Because as always, it's a great pleasure having you on, man.
I
so much,
actually need
guys.
to take off too. I've got a Sputnik interview coming up. So
Oh yeah, he's talking to the Russians. Yeah, the Sputnik is
Bye-bye.
really good, by the way. Yeah,
I'm not a Russian bot. I'm a Russian. I immigrated.
yeah,
That's true.
that's very true. Yeah, take it easy, Mark.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure.
Now we can go
As
real
always.
wild.
Whenever you
now.
want.
Alex,
Oh, yeah.
your Ukraine rap thing threw me completely in the beginning of the whole thing. I was like, is that serious or not? I can't even tell.
Well, good. That was the point. But I'm happy you enjoyed it, Mark. That's what I want.
did.
You know, I want you to be like, is it real? Is it fake? But now it's at my city council. It's hard for me to go and trick them because they kind of know who I am. It kind of sucks. I've lost some of its luster. So,
It was
Mark,
epic. It was epic.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Take it easy, Mark. Yeah. Let me just check here.
Wow, Ian, it's nice to finally be on a stream with you. Yeah, we've never officially. And you've been crushing it. So what do you think about Twitter Spaces? You know, they should add video to Twitter Spaces. How do you think they can improve that?
Oh yeah, so the big thing they can improve obviously is to add playlists, right? I think that's missing. YouTube has playlists, but Twitter Spaces, I mean, if you want to search for them, good luck. They're hard to find.
Do they save? I didn't realize. Dude, Twitter Spaces
save.
save.
They save.
I
Yeah.
didn't even realize that.
You can set them to save if you're the host. Yeah, if you're the host, you can set them to save. Yeah, so make sure to turn that thing on. Otherwise, it's not going to save. Yeah.
You can't use Twitter Spaces on iPads. That's weird.
Yeah.
I don't understand why.
I don't know why either. You can only use it on an iPhone and an Android, and Android is a bit unstable, and you can't use it on desktop. You can tune in on the desktop, but you can't actually use it there. So there's definitely a lot of work that needs to be done.
But that could be a huge thing. I mean, people are really liking that because you can just tell.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the new frontier for journalism, right? It's a new frontier for podcasting. Podcasting could be done there. I mean, obviously they need to improve the audio, and the way that people cut each other out kind of sucks because like here, like on this chat here, we can interrupt each other, no problem, right? But on Spaces, if I'm speaking and you start speaking, I'm going to get muted, which really, really sucks, right? That's the problem with Spaces. They need to work on that. There's a lot of issues with it, but it does have a lot of potential, and it's good that Elon is focusing on that. That seems to be his like number one priority, besides getting rid of the pedophiles, which is
and like because I know you've grown a huge following on Twitter. My Twitter following is huge. I mean, I'm just blessed or lucky, and it's like it's a very important tool. So I'm just saying, like I'm my boat rises with Twitter. So I'm like,
right, same.
And I just know you're really dialed in. Brian, I'm kind of new to you. I don't know. Are you addicted to Twitter too, like Ian and I are?
No, I was repeatedly suspended, and then I would sneak back on and get suspended because I would point out that in Getty Images there were Nazi symbols in the Ukrainian, on the Ukrainian, like spot the Nazi symbol on the Ukrainian uniform. So I was repeatedly suspended. So I can't really gain much of a following, but I tried to be on Twitter.
You should Alex, Brian is somebody that you should pay attention to. He runs a YouTube channel called The New Atlas, and it is some of the smartest commentary of the war and geopolitics generally. The New Atlas.
I'm subbing to it right now. New Atlas. Yeah. I'm subbing
because
to it right now.
Brian's the man. And I don't know, Brian, what your current Twitter name is, your Twitter handle. Very, very good.
Let me check because it's Brian J. Berletic. Because I've had quite a few of them.
Twitter is a cesspool too, but it's like the only place where something can truly go viral because Instagram can't really go. Something doesn't necessarily really go viral, but Twitter you can be like a nobody and you tweet something funny and then big enough account retweets it and it can be seen. So I think that's like the actual quote unquote digital town hall because somebody with no voice, if somebody gives it a signal boost, it can be seen by everybody. So that's why I think it's also important for that factor because you make journalists compete with independent human journalists, people that are on the ground looking at it with their cell phones. Yep. And also just the way, like I see the direction of Spaces, that it's going to be like YouTube almost. If you had video on there, people would be watching that because YouTube's dying. We're all on YouTube. But if you compare YouTube in 2023 to 2016, it's totally different.
2016 was so much bigger, right? So much
better. You could go viral.
Spaces.
But I'm saying now on YouTube, you almost have to pay for your content. Like these corporations, they're the ones that are paying for their content to be at the top of the algorithm. So unless you have dedicated fans, like Brian, you have 200,000 subs, which is really hard. I have a few 100,000. My fans see it, but it's still my stuff still doesn't go viral on YouTube. I'm sure yours doesn't go viral on YouTube, but Twitter, my stuff can go viral on Twitter. So it's just I don't know. It's just. It's tough building.
And Twitter's the only place where Andrew Tate and Greta Thunberg can have it out, Like
exactly right.
Alex, can I ask you, before Twitter Files came out, what was your experience on Twitter now? And now Elon Musk has bought it, and now Twitter Files are out. People are starting to see. Has your experience on Twitter changed?
Dude, I'm a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. I know that they've been, cooking the books the whole time. I mean, I've just been saying that. So it's like, the Twitter files. I'm like, want more juicy stuff. I want like more evidence of them saying, I like exactly what's going to happen. Supposedly that they're going to release, whether you were shadow banned or not. Like, I'm dying for that.
Yeah.
I want to know that.
Yeah.
That's great. But this is no surprise to me. I mean, we have a thing called Operation Mockingbird where we just had Larry on. We have the CIA. They're in every single form of our television, radio, media, communication. So, I mean, the FBI and Twitter are working together. Oh, golly.
You've got to be dumb not to think that was happening. Right?
Of
course it was happening. Of course it was happening.
Emailing each other? Oh, my gosh. I mean
but the media will tell us it's not happening because they're the ones doing it, right? They're the ones doing it. And now we have evidence. And they're like, oh, everybody knew it was happening. It's not a story. It's like,
well, we can only so much, but guys, look at all this medical stuff. I mean, now everybody's, basically changing their whole thing on the vaccine and COVID. Yep. And I think even more information is going to come out, and nobody's going to be like, oh, we were wrong. Or even if they say they're wrong, even if the medical industry says, oh, we were wrong and we rushed this, we did this, everybody's going to be like, oopsie poopsie, we tried our best, and nobody's going to care. Just like the weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. Yep. Just like whenever we make a mistake, people are just saying, oh, we were trying our best at that time. Yet we shut down every business. I mean, people literally lost their livelihoods. I mean, it's like
people lost their lives. They committed suicide.
Exactly. Yeah. And nobody after the fact can be like, oh, the lockdowns are good. Nobody after the fact can say, oh, taking kids out of school was good. I mean, there's just no way. You look at the social, the standardized testing now, these kids are like in 6th grade or reading at like a 1st grade level, because I'm just saying, I mean, you imagine you go, what is it, 24 months without being in school when you're the most important time when I was learning my ABCs. Yeah, I mean, how are you going to learn? You're almost forced to be autistic. And that's not another thing is talk about a conspiracy. I was just walking through the airport, and I think 1 out of 4 human beings is autistic or is on the spectrum of Asperger's or something now. And maybe it's because they're not born with it. Maybe it's because externalities stuff in our food, but it's like we are being dumbed down by choice. It's literally the movie Idiocracy, where, I mean, nobody is, and I'm not saying that to be like black-pilled or that the world's over, but I see these people and I go and I interact. It's like nobody wants to look into it for themselves. And that's what I've noticed with my content is that I don't even want you, Ian. I don't want you, Gonzalo. I don't want you, Brian, to be like ideologically aligned with me. I just want people to question the reality in which they live in. And nobody does that, guys. We all do that. But nobody does that.
They're like NPCs.
Exactly right. NPCs.
And NPCs in various different ways. Some of them, like, you criticize Trump just a little bit, and they're like, "You're a traitor." It's like, what?
Yeah, I know.
I'm trying to help him.
Yeah, Trump has so many bad things about him. I mean, oh my gosh, dude, Julian Assange not letting him out. I mean, dude, he's literally letting out Kodak Black, dude. He shut us down. I mean, I have so many complaints with Trump, and that's the other thing.
Plan, the First Step Act. It's like, who does this benefit? No one.
And he's selling NFTs and all this stuff. I mean, listen.
Look, I've always thought that he was a used car salesman. He's really good.
He was an NFT
I'm a used car salesman. Be careful, Gonzalo. We exist.
Okay.
I was selling cars.
No, he's an NFT salesman. Even worse.
I know. But an NFT salesman is the only thing worse than a car salesman.
But the guy basically reflected back on his audience what the audience was cheering for. Whenever he threw out some line and he got a lot of cheers, he'd repeat the line and expand it, and that's how he got his huge following.
It's terrible because he's pandering to them so much, right? He's no longer being his own man. He's become his worst member of his audience. Like, he's repeating and retweeting QAnon stuff, crazy stuff that like his normal supporters, people who voted for him in 2016, like Mike Cernovich, for instance, are now his biggest detractors. They're like, what the hell is this guy doing? What is he doing?
Well, I think they have some fair criticisms.
Yep.
No, I'm wondering how the 2024 election is going to play out. I personally, and I've said this before, I don't think that there's going to be an actual 2024 election. I give the odds 3 out of 5 that it doesn't happen, that they come up with some excuse, some bullshit, because the current regime doesn't want to lose power no matter what. Russia, something like that.
Yeah, we're at war with Russia. We can't have an election because, the Russians...
because there was an election during the Civil War, but the Russians are invading Ukraine or some shit, and no election, because these people in the positions of power today are so hell bent on holding on no matter what. That's what we were talking about before for over an hour, actually, that they are so locked in and they will never give up power. And if they think for a second that somebody will take over, they're going to pull the plug. Brian?
In 2024, is anyone going to run that is actually a real challenge to the establishment? Because look at Trump. He came in, everyone pretended that he was rocking the boat. He said he was going to, drain the swamp. He restocked it. He stocked it with some of the scariest swamp monsters that there are.
John Bolton crying out loud. What the hell?
Exactly.
Man?
And even beyond John Bolton, I mean, all the people who even took him down. I mean, Alexander Vindman, that was his appointee. What the hell?
Yeah. Well, that's because Trump wanted to be liked by the left anyway. He wanted to be liked by both sides. He didn't realize he couldn't. He was so good at doubling down, but he couldn't double down with his base because he wanted to be liked. Because really, I don't believe Trump is racist at all. I don't believe he's bigoted. I believe he's working gay. He works for The Apprentice forever. He had black friends. So like all those isms that they put on Trump, all fake. Now, is he, egomaniac, freak? Yeah. Narcissist? Does he have, does he have some personality tendencies that are, antisocial behavior? For sure. But those isms that they try to, paint him having, I don't believe those are the case. That's the case.
No. And look, the establishment is trying as hard, and we were talking about this before, of like how to replace the current locked-in establishment. And I don't see it. I mean, yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene, apart from her brief liaison with you, we heard about it. But apart from that, is there really a big chunk of people who can come in and take over? We don't see it. At least I don't.
It's hard to see.
You, Alex? I mean, you're there in the swamp.
Well, yeah, but let me just tell you something. You look at what happened in Kerry Lake in Arizona, and, now people are like, I guess they're kind of Monday morning quarterbacking her campaign, like, oh, she should have done it like this, or she, alienated some of the right.
It was stolen.
Yeah, but it was 100% stolen. I mean, you got 20-inch paper, 19-inch stuff. I mean, all of this should have been figured out in the 2 weeks. I'm saying the 2 weeks of early voting. They didn't have any issues with early voting. And then the day that this is what I'm saying, is that they can cook the books, and it only takes like Maricopa County. It takes like one county in Pennsylvania, one county in this one place, and it all affects the entire election. And that's how you get the Electoral College to swing in your favor. So for me, the election integrity does not exist anymore. I would put our elections on the same as Haiti when I come to trusting it. Actually, as a matter of fact, I probably trust Haiti's elections more than I trust ours, because they probably have voter ID.
They're going to use with paper ballots. They're going to
exactly.
I mean, if France can do paper ballots and count it all in one day, 100% accuracy, why can't America? That doesn't make any sense.
They don't want to. They don't want
exactly.
to.
They have this power,
but they cheated with George Bush. They cheated with George Bush versus Al Gore. I mean, I was a young kid then, but now looking back, they just probably made it. They made it.
The Democrats were actually right. He did cheat. Yeah, he did cheat to win.
Yeah,
he was manipulated.
So, look, at the end of the day, if you have a population where a large enough group of people do not believe in the election, do not believe in the established formal transfer of power, that's a recipe for civil war.
It's a collapse that's coming,
Yeah, and the thing is, see, economically, and one of the things that we were discussing before, and one of the big changes that have happened, because ultimately this is a year in review show, so let me get back to the year in review, was the pivot of Saudi Arabia to China and Russia, especially China. That is huge implications, because if the U.S. loses the petrodollar, then the United States is going to suffer hyperinflation. Because, the amount of dollar printing has been absurd since 2008.
They buy up foreign resources with that money that they print all the time. And these foreign countries get ripped off because their economies go to shit because the US dollar just keeps inflating. It's worthless.
And so what's going to happen is that once the currency hyperinflates and people do not have money for basics, food, heating, electricity, gasoline, and you need gasoline in the States. That's the one country in the world where you need a car. The United States is going to go through paroxysms that we've never experienced since the Civil War. And that's something to be paying attention to. And a lot of people over at the Duran, the Duran, Alex Christoforou and Alexander Mercouris. It's a great show. And anyway, we had Alex Christoforou on earlier. They've said that they think that 2023 is going to be the year for an American crisis in terms of legitimacy of the established authority. And my thinking is that there will be such a crisis, and the only way that established authority, the locked-in leadership class in the States, can get over that crisis of authority is by implementing repressive measures that have never been seen in the United States. I think that that's in the cards for next year.
They'll just bring the lockdowns back. They'll bring the lockdowns back. They'll say,
they'll call it lockdowns for climate change.
The climate emergency.
They will do that. That's going to happen very soon, and they'll lock down for climate change.
They're practicing in colleges. in
Yeah.
colleges,
But-
they're
but-
practicing climate lockdowns. It's like,
Of course,
Sorry.
but I'm
What the
saying,
hell?
just look at happened in Buffalo. They just ransacked all the WalMarts. I mean, that's what's going to happen. When you say
Yep.
civil war, I don't think it's necessarily the civil war. You think like what people imagine,
More
like
like
there's going to be
anarchy.
fighting in the streets. It's just going to be like people like burning down auto zones, and then like we're
Yeah.
not going to be able to go to our grocery store and
Yes,
get bread.
BLM
So then I'm
everywhere.
saying all the normal
BLM
families should be like, what?
everywhere.
Well, I'm
No
saying, you're like,
police.
what the hell? How do I get a bread? A normal mom with their kids, but because everybody else, the
Yep.
grocery store will be ransacked. So that's what I imagine. That it'll just be like the cops will be, stand down.
just a collapse.
type
Just a
situation.
collapse, yeah.
I don't necessarily think, because I almost think human beings don't really want to just blow each other's brains out. I mean,
No.
some
No.
will, of course, because
Some will,
crazy,
yeah, but it'll be gang fights. Yeah,
but you
gangs
know what
will
I
take
mean.
each other out.
There'll be some Kyle Rittenhouse skateboarding stuff going on, but most people will just be like trying to make it. You know what I mean? Like they'll. Because
It'll be like the early days of Ukraine when, the invasion first happened. All these gangs, they were armed by Zelensky, like 30,000 guns out in the streets, all, escaped from prison. I'm not escaped,
I
released from prison.
reported that. I said this would happen, and they called me.
Yeah, and they all turned on each other. They didn't turn on the Russians. They turned on each other, right? And
Of
that's where all the
course!
violence
Yeah,
is
I mean,
happening.
the prisoners
We're
are
going
gonna
to
turn on
see
each other.
large
I
amounts
was-
of that. Now,
I was
fortunately,
in
the
Kiev.
Ukrainians got that in control. They got it under control eventually. But, I mean, because they have like a functioning government. They have a functioning government. But if this would have happened in America and it's more organic versus, say, an invasion from a foreign country, then who's going to keep it in control? I don't know. I mean, is the military going to step up and impose martial law?
No, because they're too busy with their
It'll be
pronouns.
like the collapse of the Soviet Union. You'll have some areas that weather it better, other areas where, just like Alex said, it's going to be a collapse. People are going to
It'd be a
be out
buffalo.
of control, violent. But a civil war, I mean, having two armed factions or more, that requires serious organization and
Yeah, that's
resources.
unlikely.
I agree.
Which sides, which circles of interest would be actually fighting each other in the U.S.? I don't know. I mean, if you could tell me, then I can explain how the Civil War.
That's why I think that the current regime, because there isn't going to be any kind of organized resistance, the current regime, as the system collapses, will become more and more repressive, precisely so as to prevent the emergence of some sort of organized resistance to their rule. You see what I'm saying? Because you're absolutely right. But
They'll become like a totalitarian fascist state, right? Without any democracy or freedom or free speech or anything. They'll just, wear black
democracy
suits.
in the name, but repressive in reality.
Yeah. North Korea.
But relative to other countries around the world, it'll become weaker and weaker because everything is falling apart, which is already happening, actually.
It'll lose everything, right? And there'll be a lot of independent, free cities that don't, subscribe to that rule. Towns. Not necessarily cities. Yeah, I could see corporations, banding together, and like Silicon Valley could be its own thing. They hire private military to, basically be their army to secure them.
Their army police kind of force. Yeah.
Well, what's sad is like America is built on the Industrial Revolution, and I'm in Texas, and there's just all these small towns that used to have factories. There's like a bread factory or like a chicken factory or something, and now we don't have any of that because we've outsourced it. So it's like we've just made our country so weak. There used to be a time when you could live in a small, quote unquote, small town, and there was jobs and there was industry and people had shops. But that world, we're all jammed in cities, so it's like that dystopian future. We're all basically locked in. They can lock us down because we're all like, we just kind of coagulated together in these clumps where they can control us easier. So,
and it's
the idea,
done on purpose.
It's very scary future. That's what I'm saying. I think
they're doing it on purpose
too.
They're
about the climate change.
I don't know if they're doing it on purpose.
I think they are doing it on purpose. I think they want to dismantle the towns and anything that's rural because these represent a threat to their order, right? Their order is the city, and they control the cities, the political machine. So they disenfranchise everybody outside, right? They make it so that you have these massive food deserts where if you're living on the outskirts of anywhere, you're not going to get anything. You have to move into the city to have any sort of to be able to live, to have a job. Now, fortunately, the pandemic, what it did was it showed a lot of people that it's possible to live outside of cities, right? That you can have a job outside of a city. And there's been this push, to move outside of cities and to, start your own farms and stuff. And in response, like some governments are trying to be so repressive, like the city governments, they're saying, oh, you can't grow your own farm. You can't grow your own food garden. That's illegal. It's not part of the climate, the climate plan. So their response really is just to be more repressive, just more and more repressive, to stop you from owning things, to stop you from having a gun,
And Ian, I think that's where the real battle lines are. I mean, people should be fighting to localize. Alex is talking about missing industry. The fight should be to bring that industry back, leverage modern manufacturing technology to get it back. I mean, that's what's going on all over Asia. You have huge companies, but then you have all of these local businesses, people running businesses, and governments are kind of the same everywhere you go. They want to try to control everything, but people all just seem to agree that no, we're going to run our businesses out of our homes. We're going to buy and sell stuff to each other, and you're not going to stop us. And they all agree on it, and there really is nothing the government can do once people agree that is the norm, and that needs to be the fight for places like the U.S. to get that back, because that is the foundation you build a society on.
Right, Russia's got it, Asia's got it, Eastern Europe, most of Eastern Europe operates like that. Small businesses are the norm there. It's not big companies. Well, yes, big companies do exist, but
but it used to be in the United States that 55% of employment was provided by small businesses. Businesses
no, it's under 5%, 10%. Yeah. Any company that's not a Fortune 500 company now is considered marginal, and they're going to go out of business. I mean, even like restaurants, like privately owned restaurants are shutting down because the rent is going too high. Like that's what they do, right? They buy up the land.
The American dream's over. You just said it, because all the corporations can artificially inflate the price of a home. I mean, people, in their 30s, my age, nobody owns a home. I mean, I have a few friends that do because they're had really good jobs. I'm just saying a lot of my friends don't. They're just renting, and that's the case with most Americans. It's like
they want to create a class of basically serfs, modern day serfs.
Bugmen, right?
What?
Bugmen. Yeah,
like
the bugmen. They live in a pod. They eat the bugs. They drink the soy. And they
will
don't
own
have
nothing, and you
jobs.
will be happy.
Like their jobs are just a dead end, and it's just provided, like by the government. The government gives them handouts. Essentially, they have no aspirations, and this is drilled into their heads from a very young age from the media. The media, like try to find all these articles that say it's better to rent a house than it is to own one. Like there's so many of them. They're like, city living's amazing. You get to go to clubs and all these cool bars and these cafes, and it's like, how about I just live by myself, in a nice house that I own and have a coffee machine? How about that? Like that's nice.
That is way nicer. No, I agree.
Anyway, so guys, we've been going on for close to 3 hours, and I can see Brian is already about to fall asleep because poor Brian is 1 in the morning.
I knew what I was getting myself into here.
Yeah, because it's been a real delight, and I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being on. Chat, why don't you hit us with a +1 for my amazing guests? It's been a real pleasure to have everybody on. Guys, stick around because I just want to say a few words before we go. Chat, I hope you enjoyed the show. It's been a real delight, and we didn't do as much reviewing as I was hoping for. We had a hell of a lot of fun.
But last thing, then everybody rate the year. So out of 10. For me, I had a good year, but everybody had a bad year, so I'd say it's like a 7.9, I guess.
I had, all in all, apart from getting arrested for the first time in my life by a secret police, no less, and being caught in the middle of
Ukrainian secret police, right?
Yeah. I had a pretty good year. So
I had a good year. Everybody else
had a great
bad year. I had a 9 in a year, but everybody else had a 5. So
it weighs it down. Yeah. Same for me. I mean, I had a 10 year this year, a 10 year, and then everybody else is kind of struggling. So it's kind of like, even itself out to like a 7.5. Yeah.
Well, you feel bad for everybody who's had a rough year, no question about it. But at the same time,
I feel very bad.
In my own case, dude, I was in the middle of Kiev when the war started. I got arrested.
You got a legendary year.
Yeah, it was like
you got a story to tell everybody. That's
I mean, I'm going to be dining out on this story for years.
I became Tucker Carlson's biological son this year, so for me, it was an incredible year.
Wait. Did Tucker and Marjorie Taylor Jones have you as their child?
Yes,
you're their love child.
Yes, I am.
Now we know.
So how can it be a bad year for me?
It was the hair that gave me away. You're Tucker Carlson's son because of the hair. Yeah. Anyway, everybody, chat, thank you so much for joining us. Guys, stick around just for a second to say bye-bye. And we will catch you next time. We will catch you next year. 2023. Bring it on.
Wow.
Take care.